22,000 miles. As far as you know. As far as you know. Are we ready, Mona? Okay. Just gonna be patient.
You do.
Just gonna be patient.
You gotta hang, man. You gotta hang. So next week, our next board meeting, come with a tie-dye shirt.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that would kind of relax everybody, huh?
Yeah, it would, totally.
Totally. There you go.
There you go.
I have a couple of those. I haven't worn them in years. Actually, Bob Dean has the same one that one of the same ones that I have. I commented on that. I go, I have that tie. But that's not the same as tie-dye. It doesn't have that same relaxing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the calming effect.
Oh,
Stop.
This will be recorded.
is that all right?
No, it is.
Mother?
At least the video has no corresponding audio.
I'm trying to eat it so I don't mumble so much. Oh, dear.
Okay, gonna call the meeting to order, please. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mona, can you take roll?
Yes, Director Strange.
Here?
President, Vice President Bradley.
Here.
Director Thomas.
I am here.
Director Underhill.
Here.
And President Davidson is absent.
Okay, public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized items. Comments limited to 5 minutes per person. Do we have any public comment? Seeing none. Item 3, the consent agenda. The following items are expected to be routine, non-controversial. Items will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member may request that any item be removed for later discussion. 3A, approval of minutes for the board meeting of May 24th and June 20th and June 28th. Review of the board director's monthly timesheets. And 3C is approval to ratify claim summary 544.
I'd like to pull item 3C.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to move for approval of 3A, 3B.
Second?
Okay. Consent agenda, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, 3C, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Director Rademan. I had a couple of questions. One is, I've got them marked here. The pipe fittings, boxes, lids on the JL pipeline project, I assume, is that all of the parts in one? You know, it's a $10,000 charge on that. I was just looking through some of the things that really stood out at me. And then we've also got a pump rebuild for $16,000 for that. I don't know the cost of rebuilding pumps, but holy smokes.
In addressing your first one, can you point out what page that's on?
Sure.
So I can.
Page 7. I'm sorry.
That's
page
okay.
7, 127, Ace Supply Corp.
Yes, the $10,049.06. If you look, that is for our pipeline replacement project under the capital R&R program. If you look off to the right with the E, that is being charged to our replacement line project down in Jenny Lind. So what they do is they'll buy all the supplies they need to be able to go through and start replacing large segments of the Bluebell line.
Okay.
And you'll be there was charges previously on this, and if you see that description and you see the E next to it, that generally means that it's down in that particular area, the Bluebell replacement. Our own construction crew is doing that work, and they're going to be looking at working in not only in that area, but I believe, Teresa, they're going to be up in West Point, Wilseyville area as well?
That'll probably be in the fall.
Yeah, they're planning to come up at some point.
Because we've got to do some work there. We're trying to finish up as much as we can until then.
Okay, so I assume that was kind of a bulk purchase then of
Yes.
a variety of different things?
Yes.
Thank you. And the pump rebuild, they're Shape Inc.?
Those are for our, I apologize.
No, that's
Those are
all
for
right.
our wastewater flight pumps, and they're normally $35,000 to $40,000.
The pumps themselves?
Right, those pumps run about $35,000 to $40,000 a piece. Those are our wastewater pumps, and they're flight. They're pretty, they're really good pumps, but when they do go bad, we try to have them repaired. And if we get buy a new one, at least we'll have one sitting there that's been repaired and ready to go if something should happen.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty touch and go with all that wastewater stuff. And then the last one, and certainly not the least, is the Stockton East Water District for $500,000.
Yes. That is you're talking about the one, $333,000?
Yeah.
The top? Yes. That is the portion of our cost share for not only the O&M side of it, which we discussed at a prior meeting, that the Army Corps of Engineers up. That's also our debt service obligation as well on the loan. About $84,000 of that is debt service. The rest of it is the O&M portion for New Hogan. That Stockton East bills, the Army Corps of Engineers bill Stockton East, and they pass through our portion of the bill to pay for that. So there's two components of that $333,000. One is the debt service component, the principal and interest on the New Hogan Reservoir that was built, and that goes out to, I think, 2023 or 2025, and then the rest of it is the O&M side.
Okay, yeah, that was gonna be my second question you just answered, is how far out on that?
Director Strange, would it be helpful to have on there to identify that this is basically a pass-through payment to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers
You know,
on something like this? Because I know, and it's perfectly fine the way it's presented here, but it doesn't give you the additional piece of information that the reason the billing goes through Stockton East is because they're, the federal government needs one entity that it does, submits bills and receives payment through, and so that's why they serve in that function. But the reality is, it's a payment that's going to the Army Corps.
Yeah, I would recommend that we do that, especially with neighboring agencies that we have other agreements with. Some people might look at that and say, all right, well, what's going on here? So, thank you.
Certainly.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay, can I add something? During the Finance Committee meeting, Terry, we asked, when do we rebuild? How do we determine if we rebuild or we buy brand new? And that was one of the things, because we saw that, and Teresa did answer that, the big one would be $300,000.
And this is Director Underhill, this is in relationship to the pump. We
Right, no,
replaced-
but I'm just saying.
Yes.
When we rebuild versus buying new is the big question.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, we've talked about that.
Good.
Although we have this $333,000 listed as going out, we have a compensating income that I think is over $200,000 this year from the electrical generation, our
Yes.
portion of the electrical generation. So it's, for that facility we're paying, but we're also balancing a payment coming back.
For me, it was more about perception, public perception of seeing a
Certainly.
payment like that.
Yeah, and again, that, obviously, that's our, our water supply for the Jenny Lind service area, yeah.
Cool. I'd like to make a motion that we approve item 3C.
I'll second that.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Can move on to 4 on our agenda, new business. 4A, Mr. Joel Metzger is going to talk about the annual high school senior scholarship winners. Looks like we have one in the building.
Good morning, Mr. Vice President, members of the board. I am very pleased to announce 2 scholarship winners this morning of our annual scholarship awards. Just to give you a little background on the program, each year CCWD provides 2 $500 scholarships. You win these scholarships by writing an essay which responds to an essay prompt that we send out each and every year. It centers around the value of water, but it's also customized for our current conditions. So I wanted to read to you what the essay prompt was so you know what they were responding to. So this year was discuss the value of water, especially in light of recent severe drought. How can Calaveras County transition from emergency water rationing during the drought to sustainable long-term water use efficiency? What measures should Calaveras and California take now in order to mitigate the negative impacts of future droughts? So we got more than 30 essays that came in responding to this question. And a committee of 3, me, Mr. Peter Martin, and Ms. Stacy Lawler, read over these essays. We brought all of our top ones together, and then we chose the 2 top winners. And the first winner is Natasha Koval. She's here this morning to read her essay. She lives in Burson, and she will attend Seattle Pacific University starting in September, where she will study business. The second winner is Daniel Boitano of McCallum Hill. He's going to attend Chico State this fall, and he will be studying or pursuing a degree in environmental science. And Mr. Boitano is regretfully unable to be here today because he's working in South San Francisco and couldn't get the day off. But he does send his thanks to the board. I'm going to have Natasha come up in just a moment to read her essay for you, but I did want to share something that both of these winners sent thank you cards in to the district, but I just wanted to read Natasha's because I really appreciated what she said. So she said, "Dear CCWD, I can't thank you enough for your generous scholarship. I will be attending a private school, Seattle Pacific University, in the fall. This means a great education, but it comes with a hefty price. With these scholarships, you are helping a small-town girl move on to something more important. I am especially thankful for this money because it means I am attending this highly prestigious school without taking on student loans. I truly thank you for this." So with that, I'll bring up Natasha to read her essay.
When I asked my daughter, who's a sophomore at the high school, if she knew Natasha, she said, "Yeah, she's real smart."
Okay, what a great introduction. Wow. Thank you. That's fantastic. Okay, well, I'll get right into it then. Water is life. If we do not have it, our economic, social, and environmental well-being would be in great jeopardy. Today, we are living in one of the most damaging droughts California has experienced. Therefore, water is understandably at the forefront of everybody's minds. If we look at a broader perspective of how the drought affects California, we can see millions of people living in dry, arid places where vegetation once thrived. In a more local viewpoint, Calaveras County is just as afflicted. Despite this downfall in our county, there are plenty of tactics we can use to combat the struggles that come along with extensive droughts. The first step to solve these issues is to make people more informed. Creating a more informed county will enable people to make educated decisions for their own lives. For example, there may be many people around Calaveras who do not understand the extent to which our drought is scathing our economy. I believe that we should have more educational programs to let everyday people know what is happening to the land that they live on. One of the most prominent aspects I have seen from this community is that there are people who are wholeheartedly willing and excited to be active in their community. We need people like that to make a difference. If we give these people the right resources to understand where we are at in regards to the drought, then we can have multiple perspectives, multiple ideologies, and multiple hands working on an issue to benefit a great amount of people. Furthermore, we can bring information and resources to our schools. Just as there are many people wanting to be active in their community, the same thing can be said for many high school, middle school, and even elementary school students who want to make Calaveras something to be proud of. From this education, we can make informed decisions as to the conservation, appropriate use of water, and how to combat any negative side effects of the drought, like that of wildfires. The first step that we can take is to find out where our priorities lie. Do we focus on agriculture, beauty, the well-being of our residents? Our county is known for being agriculturally based. It is obvious that agriculture necessitates water, and for such an important player in the greater economic outlook, we cannot deprive our local farms of water. With that in mind, we need to work around this issue. Similarly, the well-being of Calaveras County residents is non-negotiable. We must protect them and give them what they have a right to. However, there is a difference between what someone wants and what they need. The key to conservation and responsibility comes in the form of individuals making collective decisions for a better cause. Each person has the responsibility to notice an issue and do something about it. Through education, I would hope that people would be able to discern between a want and a need. Maybe that means not watering their lawns, taking shorter showers, and more. We cannot tell people what to do with their lives, but if we give them the resources and education to see what needs to be done, I'm sure that we can see a great amount of change. We must be proactive to defend ourselves against the ravaging effects of drought. We can be efficient about giving people educational resources. We can give them opportunities to make independent decisions for themselves. And we can also give them a voice to speak about the issues we face. There is no way to stop or completely fix a drought as nature takes its own course. We as Calaveras County residents can be proactive about the choices we make, the relationships we form, and the priorities we place in the world.
Well, thank you very much, Natasha, and congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So this is for you. Certificate. We'll have a check coming out to you shortly. Could I have the board come down for a quick picture in the front here? Right in the center here. Congratulations. Good job.
I get to stand next to the tall of this part.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then over here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Great. Thank you, everyone. Congratulations.
Your dog was right, she's really.
Okay, moving on, item 4B, recognition of Tamara Green for 20 years of service with CCWD. Teresa.
Good morning, President, Vice President Ratterman and Board of Directors. We're here today to recognize one of our district employees, Tammy Green, for her 21-plus years of service. Tammy, you want to step on up? Just letting you know, she was the first female hired by CCWD here at the district, November of 1995. So she came in as a plant operator, and it says plant operator / repair in your folder. So that's what we put down here. So anyway, 21 plus years, and she's been a great asset to the district. And I have a resolution to read for the board to vote on. And then maybe afterwards you might have something you want to say. How's that? Okay, it says a resolution number 2017-43, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Calaveras County Water District recognizing and honoring CCWD employee Tammy Green. Whereas Tamara Tammy Green has diligently served the Calaveras County Water District from November 13, 1995 to present, and is scheduled to retire August 31st, 2017. And whereas Tammy is the first female field operator hired by the district, Tammy could be relied upon to always perform her duties, working up on the pass at various wastewater and water facilities in all kinds of inclement weather. You could give her a project and Tammy would run with it and make it her own. Tammy was reliable and was always there to make sure there was coverage. Tammy was also instrumental in training most of the operators on the pass in the wastewater operations. And whereas it was known which facility Tammy had been at because her glasses or keys were often left behind. I had to throw that in.
It's fitting.
Yes. She was notorious for leaving her glasses behind. She has had to replace at least probably 100 pair of glasses over her career. And whereas Tammy has worked with a sense of dedication and responsibility to the district's customers, county taxpayers, her fellow colleagues, as well as her position. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Directors of the Calaveras County Water District that Tammy Greens, Senior Wastewater Treatment Plant Operator, is hereby commended for her 21 years and 8 months of dedicated service with the district. Be it therefore resolved that the Board of Directors of the district wish Tammy all the best in her retirement activities, passed and adopted this 26th day of July 2017.
Well, congratulations.
Congratulations.
We're going to miss you. You leave me behind alone.
Okay, this is an action item. Just to make sure that last line, passed and adopted, actually does happen. We need a motion here.
I make a motion to approve the resolution for Tamara Green.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any public comment on this item?
Those who know Tammy well, now's your time.
Well, my name is Barry Rudolph. I live in Columbia, and I've known Tammy for almost 20 years, and our kids all grew up together, and Tammy and Dave and everybody, they're all part of the crew. And let me tell you, when I first met Tammy, I couldn't believe the accomplishments that she would do when she was trying to raise 2 kids and hold down a job and do a darn good job at it. And I would watch her at work, or not at work, but I would watch her, how she handled herself and the things she juggled, and she took care of those kids and raised them, and she did a damn good job, and I was really proud of her as somebody who could take on that kind of a challenge and hold down a job as challenging as this can be. That's a lot of responsibility of what she did, serving the residents and the customers in that Murphy's area, Forest Meadows area when she was working. So I spent 36 years in the fire service doing shift work and things like that, and so I know what kind of a challenge that is when you try to meet those family demands and meet a job like this. So I was really proud of her, and this is a great day to be able to see this all the way through. And I'm sure you guys, well, maybe you don't. You're losing one heck of a person here. Somebody who's overcame a lot, somebody who tolerated a lot, and still to this day did a damn good job. So I'm really proud of her, and I wasn't planning to speak, but I just got here, so I thought, I'm going to come up here and say something. So I'm proud of you. I think it's great. Welcome to the other side.
Thank you very much. We got more.
Jesse Hampton, Plant Operations Manager. As an operator myself, it's going to be sad to lose Tammy because she brings an excitement to operations as far as she's always looking at things and looking at how you can change things or work around things, and she's just excited about it. And that enthusiasm is what I like. I like to see that. I appreciate everything that you've done for our district. It's been a pleasure working with you and the time that we've had together, and I envy you.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. Working on the pass is rough. I mean, I'm going up there with her when I first got here, and she's showing me around at all our plants that they have to take care of. 5 people up there taking care of, you know, 2 water plants, one up there in Hunters and one in Sheep Ranch, and then you've got the various 5 or 6 wastewater treatment plants up there that they have to take care of. And she's in there, and she's driving in that snow with me in the car, and I'm afraid of driving in the snow. And she's like a pro at it. She's like, it's nothing to her at all. She does bring excitement. She does bring, you know, when you got a lot of guys out there working, okay, it's kind of nice. You got a female out there that's spunky and ready to go and is always with a smile on her face. So she is going to be greatly missed. But I do really wish you nothing but the best for your retirement. It's going to be fun. I know it is. And I am too jealous.
Okay. I think I would like to, first of all, thank you all for today. I feel very grateful. I've been reflecting on my job and career, and I'm very grateful that I had this opportunity, this career. It's been challenging, but also rewarding. And raising the kids, I couldn't have done it without those 2 back there, too. Those 3 back there. That's my husband and father of our children. But it was, it was a team, and I had the best support system, the best friends and family, and it was all a challenge and all rewarding, and I'm just excited for the future. And I care about this district, and I look forward to seeing where CCWD goes in the future. And anyway, thank you for today.
Thank you. And Bertha, Bertha, before we leave the dais, we have a vote to take. Make sure that this thing happens. Okay.
Tammy, I'd like to say a few things. First of all, good for you for being...
More of my family here. So.
Oh, nice.
More of my support system. My sister Brenda in the back was, she was the TUD operations manager, and she's my mentor who got me into this whole thing. But thank you, sis, I love you. And my mother, who gave me everything. Hi, honey.
But I'd like to say, I see you as a real role model to be the first woman, hired to operate the facilities and all. I'm sorry. And, good for you. I think that we need more people like you. And I know that governmental employment sometimes seems to be or can be kind of a thankless job at times. But persevering and hanging in there for 21 plus, years, it's like, wow, good for you.
My daughter at 5 years old, she told me, "Mommy, you need to persevere." So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and take let's take roll call on this one, can we?
Yes, Director? Yes. Director Thomas?
By all means, yes.
Director Strange?
Of course.
And Vice President Redmond?
Absolutely.
I have one more thing. And Tammy.
Oh, thank you.
We talked about, or Terry mentioned, and it has been talked about, the fact that, you are a visionary, you are, our only wastewater treatment plant operator, a woman, and this is definitely a goal, and I would hope that more women would be interested in coming into the water industry. We need you. We need your sparkle. We need your glow. And again, we came up with this little thing. This is a darling picture of Tammy, and let me read this. The same thing about losing the glasses. First female field operator to be hired by the district in November 1995 is retiring after 20 years on July 28, 2017. Tamara has 2 children, likes to travel, and is known as fun-loving, crazy gal who notoriously leaves her keys and glasses everywhere. Let's wish her the best in retirement. Safe travels, Tamara, and this is signed by the board and our general manager. And if you need him, our legal counsel, Matt Weber. And so I just think this is darling. Yes. So thank you. Thanks.
And congratulations in your retirement.
And I just want to note, Tammy, thank you so much for your incredible dedication and service to have 2 full-time jobs, nothing more important than being a mother, and to do this as well, and set a great example. And as you can see, her smile is infectious, and she's just got such a positive attitude, and it's always, that's going to be dearly missed. It really is. So just a great reminder of, again, of what the most important part of this organization really is, and it's the people. So thank you. And would we like to get a picture with the board? Okay.
Everybody back up toward the... Looking good, guys. We're gonna do a quick flash show. 1, 2, 3. And 1 more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, second camera. One, two, three. Let's do another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
You did a great job. Thank you. Sharing it with us. Oh, right on. Oh, wow. Yeah.
And thank you all for coming. This is, I'm sure, makes it even a better day for Tammy. Great.
Thank you.
This meeting is really dragging.
A lot of photo opportunities here. Okay, moving the agenda on, I think our photo ops are ending. 4C, discussion action regarding ballot selection for California Special District Associated Seat 3. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This board, members of the board, this agenda item is just to cast the ballot, if the board so chooses, in the California Special District Association Board of Directors election. We have a seat that represents our area, Region 2, Seat C. We have 3 candidates that are running for that. As a member of the association, we have a vote for that. And as you can see, the names of the individuals that are running: Pete Campa, he's the incumbent, has been there for many years, since 1998. I think we all know Pete. I know I've personally known Pete for many years. I've had an excellent working relationship with him. He's provided a lot of mentorship to me in my career over the years. And so Pete is one running, and we also have 2 other individuals, Orlando Fuentes from Consumnes Community Service District and Scott Holbrook from Auburn Area Recreation and Park District. With this agenda item, the request is for the board to consider the casting its ballot in for Mr. Campa for his continuation on the CSDA board. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Oh, I'd just like to make a comment. I've known Pete for several years, and I cannot, and it's hard for me to believe, but I guess it's true, that someone wants and does such an excellent job with CSDA. It is just amazing to watch him talk about the issues and about the positions in the organization. He really, really cares. And so I firmly, would approve the nomination, but we're going to be taking a vote. Pete does an excellent job.
So can we do this through a motion then?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we vote for Pete Campa for the CSDA Board of Directors in the 2017 election.
Second?
Okay, I got a comment also. I've known Pete, he was, when I first came to CCWD, he was the general manager at TUD, and have also been involved, he's been a teacher at most of the classes that I've taken at CSDA. Very, very knowledgeable, very well respected in the industry, and I certainly support this motion. So we have a motion and a second. Any public comment on this? Any further comment from the board? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Carries 401.
Do we want to take a picture? Or?
Yeah, let's all gather. Can we all come down in front of the,
Joel could Photoshop Pete into the
item
minute.
4D, discussion action regarding state legislation in the 2017-18 session. SB 623, Joel, take it away.
Good morning again, Vice President Ratterman and members of the board. I'm here to present AB 623 by Senator Monning. We are bringing this to you by the special request of Aqua. We got this request very, very recently. Otherwise, we would have run this through the State Ledge Committee, Legal Affairs Committee, I'm sorry. But Aqua is asking us to take a position on this, which would be oppose unless amended. While the intent of this bill is something that Aqua agrees with and that we agree with, which is providing help to low-income folks who have contaminated water that serves their communities or their wells, that's something that we all agree with, and we want to provide safe drinking water to all Californians. There are some major flaws in the bill that Aqua does not agree with and that we do not agree with as well. Our relationship with Assemblymember Bigelow is key here. He's the vice chair of the Appropriations Committee for the Assembly. This is going to the Appropriations Committee when they come back from recess in August. And so we're going to be speaking with Bigelow directly on this and making sure that he understands the importance of these problems with the bill. The biggest one, and the one I really want to bring to this board's attention, is that the author just confirmed in writing that he's going to add a water tax, which would be put on local bills in order to fund this. And that is not a precedent that we believe is appropriate to set for this or for any other, any effort for that matter. We don't want to see a water tax. And so that's why we are recommending this board comes out against this at this point, unless there's another funding source identified. And I do want to let the board know, we're not just saying no. In the letter that we attached here, we are identifying several other sources of funding that would help put money in this fund and do this good work without having to put a water tax on that we would have to enforce locally. All the details about how that tax would work and what our role would be are still unclear. We haven't seen the exact language. We just have confirmation that it's coming. We'll see that language after recess. So at this point, we are asking this board to take a oppose unless amended position, and then we will bring the language back once it's submitted by Monning. We'll talk to Bigelow, and we'll continue very closely following this bill and keeping the board updated as it moves along during this session.
I'd like to make a motion that we oppose unless amended SB 623.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any public comment? Any further discussion, any comments from the board?
Do you foresee any chance at all that they could possibly come through with this water tax? Remember, we just are getting rid of a fire tax that we all opposed. And it was, what did we have it for, about 4 years or something before we, yeah, before it was finally taken away? So is there any possibility that,
Well, I mean, there's always a possibility. That's why we need to take these positions to let the
I
folks.
mean, you don't know of any way he's going to slide it in?
Well, I think we need to see the language that is going to be put forth. That has not been made available yet. All we have is that confirmation that it's coming. So I think we'll have a much better idea once we see the specific language.
You'll see what tactic he's going to be using.
Yes, but absolutely. You know, we're concerned about this. You know, once you see this sort of thing happening, then a lot of other things could be tacked onto water bills. And yes, it's a detailed and intricate process to get there, but we don't want to go down that road. And that's why Aqua has asked specifically for our help on this effort to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, when they talk about going on, you know, some private domestic wells and the issues with the DAC definitions and things like that, I'm just not, I'm not comfortable with this. I do appreciate, you know, the reason, you know, listing the reasons for that. I think it's important that we do that every time, you know, we approach something like this. So I want to commend you and staff for doing that. I think that's great.
Call for the question.
Okay. No further comments. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? 401.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
4E, review and direction of the fiscal year 2016-17 fourth quarter investment report. Mr. Meyer.
Good morning, Mr. Vice President, members of the board. I guess this is going to be the beginning of quite some time for me to be at the podium here, so if you want to get coffee or or refreshments, because we've got a number of items in front of us here.
This would be the time to kind of push it along.
Yes, yes. The item before you is a regular item we bring to your board every quarter. It's a review and discussion regarding our quarterly investment report. This is for the fourth quarter of the fiscal year, which is April 1 through June 30th of 2017. Just some highlights of this report, and I'll open up for questions, but I also want to tell you some of our discussions we had at the Finance Committee and some of the changes that we're looking to make moving forward. The fourth quarter is when we receive usually our second installment of property tax revenues coming from the county. That's why if you see the change in the positive change in the amount of cash we had on hand, the 1.8 million, that's part of it. We also had a CD mature. This is an Umpqua Bank CD, one of several we had with them that was used to collateralize our back-on loan. I'm sorry, not the back-on loan, but the PERS side fund loan. We put that in place. That matured, so we had that cash coming back. We also had a CDARS with Sierra Community Bank, which is a larger investment, a $2 million CDARS. They take that dollar amount and spread it amongst multiple banks to make sure that every amount within that bank is under the $250,000 threshold, including interest, because if a bank fails, that is covered by FDIC, the insurance. And FDIC covers anything up to $250,000. Well, one of the financial institutions which they placed the CD with failed during this time frame. FNB New Orleans, and it was taken over by the feds and assets transferred to another bank. The FDIC stepped in and paid off what they owed us, which was $243,000 and change. So that kind of makes up what you see in the change in total cash and investments, so that those dollars are coming in and they help offset some of our outflows in cash, obviously salary and benefits and other costs that we have associated with running the operations. Now, under my category of financial consideration, it just kind of gives a synopsis of what the feds are thinking about, look at the economy and where they think the economy is headed. As you're aware, in June, the feds raised their rate another 25 basis points, and they signaled that there's probably going to be at least one more in the future, maybe in December, and then for future years moving out, they plan on slowly increasing the Fed funds rate. And their goal is looking at employment numbers and inflation. That's what they're here to manage employment, unemployment rate, bringing it down, and keeping inflation close to their 2% target. Inflation hasn't been going up. It's actually receded a little bit. So they're struggling with that and managing this process and keeping the economy moving along, especially when you look at the global end, because there's pressures in the other countries to keep interest rates down in some of their central banks.
Question. Why is a decrease in inflation bad?
Decrease in inflation means that the economy isn't as growing as much as you want to see. Well, we could fall back into that stagnation that Japan had for many years, where you're just not seeing costs increase, which also pushes down wages. And until there's a little bit of shrinkage in the force, the employment force, and there's a little bit more demand, there's little to no incentive for employers to increase wages unless it's done through regulatory process by legislators. Yeah. And that decreases the power, the buying power of individuals, and so that's something that they want to see. The Fed's, 2% is a healthy economy. There has been some growth, but there's also underutilization of the workforce, because not everybody has gone back into the workforce since the recession. Yes, you see a 4.3 unemployment rate, but there's a lot of people still on the sidelines who don't go back into it because the work is either part-time, doesn't have benefits, or they're finding other ways to get income. A lot of them are doing a lot of these part-time jobs, Uber, things like that, and it's just not full employment, which is going to be a challenge for us. But the other flip side of this is, since there's little inflation and there's not much increase in the corresponding interest rates that we earn, we see a little bit of an uptick. The Feds play with the rates on the short term. Hopefully it ends up changing the long-term view of yields on investment in treasuries is what they're looking for. We just haven't seen their movement translate into significant increases in the yield curve on the longer end, which means to us there's very few opportunities to increase our investment income. We've been staying short for quite some time now because of the fact that the yields out 1 and 2 years isn't much different than what we see on the shorter end, which LAIF gives us. LAIF gives us 1.03 and 1.05% interest. Banks don't even touch that a lot with their CDs and such. So there's a lot of challenges going on into how to increase our investment income in a safe manner and to help offset some of our costs. My challenge is, recently, is I haven't seen any investments that on the long term are worth our while. They're starting to appear, but pretty much when they appear, they're gone. And because the brokers see them and then they make their phone calls and decide, okay, do you want to buy this, do you want to buy that? You're going to have to hold it for 2 to 3 years to get maturity, but you can always sell it if it gets to the point where the price to yield ratio is such that it's better to sell. We do a buy and hold methodology. I buy an investment and hold it because I can't actively manage investments on a day-to-day basis. Look at what's out there, look at what we have, check the yield curves, check to see where the price point is to be able to buy and sell. Now, we've been doing pretty good in a low investment yield environment. As I said, even LAIF's 1 basis point, or 100 basis points. And that's what you see on CDs and other investments, or that's what your effective yield would be if you use municipal funds and buy on the secondary market. But my question to, and this is what we talked about in the Finance Committee, am I leaving money on the table by not actively investing our portfolio? And when I mean actively investing, that's looking at it daily basis, buy, sell when you need to, reinvest that into something else with a higher yield, managing it towards cash flow, liquidity, and obviously safety. I was approached about a little over a month ago by a gentleman who works for Chandler Asset Management. They're the same management group that helps the county manage their assets. And they are now creating a market for smaller agencies like ourselves, meaning agencies with portfolios into the $20 to $30 million range. Generally what happens is they get a commission based on the number of points of the portfolio and what they transact. Larger companies can't make money on us, so they don't even offer services to us. We used to have a management company, but that's when our portfolio was $40, $50 million. Once it went down below 30 million, it just didn't make sense, plus the recession. So my proposal to the Finance Committee is, as we get through this next phase of our financial analysis, I'm going to go out and do an RFP and go talk to a number of these asset managers to see what they can offer in ways of asset management and active management of our portfolio, meeting our guidelines, which includes LAIF as still part of it, includes our bank account, because if we keep so much with Uncle Bank, they defer our banking fees. So there's a balancing job to do there, and Chandler is familiar with this. City of Folsom, when I was there, used Chandler assets. I talked to Barbara Sullivan over at the county. They use it and have for a number of years. So in doing this, I want to do an assessment to see if we're leaving too much money on the table, and is it time to switch to a more active management of our investments as interest rates slowly creep up. And this is just kind of want to make your board aware that I'm going to be reviewing this process. If there's going to be some change, I'll bring it back to the Finance Committee for their review, discussion, and direction before I bring it to the full board. Okay. With that long-winded explanation of where we're going, are there any questions on our investment portfolio?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Terry then Russ.
Yeah, the Umpqua Bank money market, none of these money markets are very big producers, but it looks like, we have such the 3.6 in there at a 0.42% yield on that. Is there anything that, that's a significant, the majority, or at least a greater percentage of the portfolio than the other investments. That's okay. Again, educate me.
Right.
I'm just some dumb country guy.
Part of this is a snapshot in time. It doesn't necessarily show the flow up and down throughout the month. This, if what you're looking at, this is money we have to pay our bills. So we keep money with Umpqua Bank. This includes that checking account and everything else that we have, a demand deposit. So they do give us a fairly good return on investments, because we write checks, as you can see by the claim summary, and payroll to the extent of over $1 million a month. So we need to have some funds in there. Plus, they give us credits on our monthly statements, because banks also make money off of fees. And our bank fees are significantly decreased if we maintain balances with them. So it's a balancing act between, do we pay higher bank fees or get a little bit less on our money market account there, the interest rates, but it's also a cash flow process where we have to make sure we have a certain amount of money to cover all our checks.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we still have 2/3 of our investment in the LAIF account, so we are getting a little better. Not great, certainly, but a little better,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's better than Wells Fargo, for sure. Yeah.
That Wells Fargo account, they are our trustee for our securities that we own. When we buy and sell munis on a secondary market, you need a trustee to be able to do that, the same way with the Wells Fargo CD. Wells acts as our trustee and holds those investments for us.
Okay, thanks.
So we just keep a minimal amount of money there.
Yeah, yeah.
Director Thomas?
Okay, Jeff, we did talk about this Chandler, the possibility of going with somebody like Chandler. I'm not so sure that we should limit our choices to one group, and let me tell you why. I know that the Humane Society that I have been a part of for a number of years got a $1.5 million bequest from one of the previous board members. And we asked a local investment manager to take a look at that, and she has put the funds in various low risk but high producing portfolio, and the aggregate came into over 10%, almost 11% on the $1.5 million. If we had some kind of a similar injection of good fortune, it would make a significant difference in our, like you say, our ability to pay the monthly bills. That's one thing. Is there any enthusiasm on the board for giving a local entity, it doesn't have to be the same person, but a local entity, $1 million to invest and see what they do with it over a 1 year's period of time? Give them to balance to Chandler, but just to see whether Chandler, a company like Chandler, really has our best interest at heart. I know that this woman who is working for the Humane Society is producing fabulous results with virtually no risk involved.
Director, maybe Jeff, I can interject. Director Thomas, I think as Jeff mentioned, we want to do an RFP for this. Jeff, is what I heard.
Yes.
We want to, so this would be open to anybody to come forward with a proposal, and certainly, including any local firm that could propose on it. I think as part of that RFP, we're probably going to need to give them our policy statement. So,
Exactly.
Although, that's phenomenal results. Our policy, of course, we've got to make sure that the safety and liquidity is at the top of the list. Yield has to give to that, unless the board were to change the policy, although I would imagine council would probably say, well, your fiduciary obligations are going to limit that. But in any event, within the construct of our policy, we're going to ask them, I would suppose, to propose and show us your track record that demonstrates how you are able to deliver. And so that would be the opportunity to do it. But as we go out with that, if there's any firms that you would like for us to circulate it to locally or anywhere else, I'd say please let Jeff know, and we'll make sure they get a copy of the RP.
Certainly. And to follow up on that, our investment guidelines are also set by the state. They have a template of what they and local agencies can invest in, and we build our investment policy based on that. And as Dave said, that will be part of the RFP process, where every person who receives the RFP will see these investments, what they can and cannot invest in, the guidelines, and then that's what the proposals will be based on. And I'm open to talk to anybody.
Well, even the PERS portfolio produced a 10% return this past year, and I'm sure that they're operating under the same stringent guidelines.
Actually, no,
They're
not.
different. Yeah, they have more freedom to invest in equity and stock than
And
we
real
would.
estate.
Right.
They're
I mean,
heavy into real
I've tried to convince Jeff that we should be in the junk bond market to get really good rates, but for some reason he won't buy into it.
Yes.
But fundamentally, I mean, I'm looking at this, and I realize I didn't bring up this point at the finance meeting, and I apologize for that, but having 70% of our money invested in a fund that's only producing a 1% return, I don't know, we really are compelled to do something different, I think. So,
And
And the
that's-
timing's important. You know, I think this is great, and I really appreciate the thought and the fact that we're going to go through this. And it's no small deal to go through an RFP. I mean, that's going to be a lot of time and effort to develop it and then to evaluate the proposals. But this really gets to what we're going to be talking about in a moment, is that everything, we have to look at everything. So, you know, any opportunities to increase revenues by maybe being a little more active in our investment strategy, if there are things out there that can help us, we're going to pursue those, and as well on the expense side too.
And I'd like to be able to offer you our policy, investment policy, to show you what the state guidelines are as to what we can and cannot invest in. And I think that'll help this whole process, and I would appreciate the input from the board and the finance committee as we move forward with this RFP process. We are under much greater restraints and rules and regulations than PERS is.
okay.
Significantly more. And those type of investments we can look at. We don't buy stocks, and we don't buy a number of things that PERS can do. We're not in the equities market. However, the areas we are in, there are opportunities, and as I mentioned, with the slow upward trend in what the Fed's doing, now's the time we're actually seeing interest rates where there's an opportunity 1 to 2 to 3 years out, because we have a 2 to 3 year average on our investments. We used to have that, we used to do much further out. But when you look at government agencies, as Dave said, safety, liquidity, and yield. Now, yield, in my mind, even when we were before the recession, if we were getting an average of 5%, that was great in government when everybody else was much higher. But I think the first step, obviously, would be to share the investment policy with your board. I can provide it to Mona, and she can send it out to you so you can become familiar with it. So as we develop the RFP and come back to the Finance Committee with that RFP, we can have a really detailed discussion.
And I would like to see that. And the last thing that I wanted to ask is, you mentioned that we have to keep enough money in the bank account to pay the monthly bills, but you know, having come from having my own company where you try to balance what's in the checkbook and savings and compared, you know, you have receivables. If we're receiving an average of $1 million a month in revenues and customer payments, isn't there a way that we could keep the balance a little lower than $2 million to pay $1 million worth of bills?
Part of that, as I mentioned, is it allows us to, the bank, to waive our banking fees.
Okay.
So we do play that cash management, Director Thomas. We look at, and again, this was just a snapshot in time. It's not reflective of the day-to-day activities. So day-to-day activities goes up and down. And there's sometimes, too, that we anticipate if this is $3 million, we may be writing a check to TNS in 1 week for $1 million or $500,000 to some of our contractors. So we try to make sure that we have cash flow available for that.
Okay. All right. I'm not trying to undermine your activities at all. Please understand. So.
Understand. But again, I think when you look at reports like this, it's snapshot in this time. It doesn't cover the daily cash flows and the changes over the 30 or 90 days prior.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Director Underhill.
Yes, just a couple of things, because I'm thinking of what Director Thomas just said about doing it locally. Historically, Jeff, have we done local investment firms?
The last time we had investment firms was in 2008 and 2009. That changed.
So-
There was one from the East Coast, there was one from the Bay Area prior to that, PFM, and...
Oh, okay, I
yes,
remember them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we stopped when the level of our portfolio dropped over time, because everybody who does investments, that manages, charges a fee.
Right.
And you have to balance out the cost of that management versus the additional yield they can get on the portfolio, and can they do better adjusting for that fee than what we could do locally, and during the recession, they couldn't.
Okay, so that, looking at the quarterly report, we are going to be having, 1.7 million mature in this month.
Day after tomorrow, or tomorrow it
Okay,
does,
so that
yes.
puts us really in the ballpark. We could,
Right. And so there are opportunities, I've started to reach out to brokers to see what we can do. Again, you're starting to see things loosen up, but when you're in the secondary market for municipal bonds, they may have a stated coupon rate of 5.5%, but you have to pay such a premium for that, it drives the yield down to 1.2% for 3 years. Sometimes their step-up bonds are callable, so just because the coupon rates may be high on bonds, that's not your effective yield.
well,
And
you're
that's
now,
where-
yeah,
that's
you're now
where-
reminding me about what we went through
Yes.
a few
And-
years ago. Yeah.
And that's where, now is the time to look at other options. As I mentioned, you asked the question at the Finance Committee, am I leaving money on the table? I probably am. But I'm trying to balance that with all the other duties we have here. And this is where, now that the economy's starting to, or the markets are starting to pick up a little bit, it's time to revisit that topic.
And what's the timing on the RFP?
It'll probably be 2 months to be able, it'll take about maybe 2 to 3 weeks to get it all put together and reviewed, and then you usually give people at least 45 days to submit, and then another 15-day review period somewhere, and that's just a ballpark, so we're probably looking at coming back maybe the end of September, beginning October.
Okay. Anything further on this item?
That's all I have.
Okay, any public comment on this item? Seeing none, move on to your next presentation. Discussion action regarding annual resolution to submit delinquencies to county tax rolls.
Yes, Mr. Vice President. This item is an annual agenda item for your board. It is to submit delinquencies that are in our billing system to the county so that the amounts owed can be placed on the county tax rolls so that we can go through that process for collections. This is for properties that are still owned by the account holder. This is not part of our collections process where if we have somebody who sold their house and left us with a bill, there we go through collections and other means. This is both, if you look at the attachment on this item, you'll see varying amounts from maybe $300 up to $1,700. Those larger amounts are generally combination accounts where water and sewer, and the smaller ones tend to be sewer. I do have a little bit of data on this. In this particular there's 104 accounts that we are requesting to be put on tax rolls for a total of $91,370.63. Looking at on a historical perspective, we've actually been experiencing a downward trend over the years since the recession. This is actually, in the number of accounts, it was 114 last year, it's 104 this year. The total dollar amount was a little over $119,000 last year, it's $91,000 this year. And so we're seeing a gradual trend downwards, and maybe that's a sign the economy's picking up locally. But, yes, ma'am.
Could I ask, I know that our customer reps also go after, late fees or, talk to the customer. Do we have any feel for their being, being able to talk to the customer earlier or better? Does that help with, the write-offs that we have?
These are not write-offs.
Well, not
Yeah,
right off.
I know
but
what
they're-
you're saying,
yeah,
yes,
uh-huh.
yes. There are conversations, because this isn't just a one bill
Right,
that's
right.
late. What you see in some of the cases, if you look at the first one, on that attachment, that's $1,248 is owed. We request being placed on the tax rolls. That's a combination water and sewer, and it was first locked off in October of 2016. So we do send out reminder notices to begin with. When they're late, they do get continued billing that shows that they're late, and they do get charges that show that they're, so these individuals understand that, yes,
Yeah, and,
They-
and, yeah, we do have customers who know how to work the system and know when to turn it off or when to turn it back on. But
Yeah.
I was speaking more in terms of, you know, the customer service with our, you know, with our customers,
Do we
our
a-
clerks.
Yeah. Do they actually call each of these people that
That's
are
what I
late?
meant. Are they being more aggressive, or they, you know?
Well,
No.
through the process, we would be talking to them, and they would be talking to them as the notices go out, and, you know, many times that would prompt a call by the customer, and there's an interaction, and so they're using every tool they have to be able to try to address it within the framework of our policy. But so I'm sure the list would be much larger than 104 if we didn't have the efforts that staff undertake to do that.
The other part about this, just for your reference, is some of these are sewer only,
Right.
and there's no lock-off mechanism for sewer.
Sewer because of safety.
So if they do not
Yeah.
pay, and we do have, that has occurred where we place it on, again, on the tax rolls, and that's how we receive our dollars.
Jeff, could you talk to the teeter program? I know I've heard about it before. How is it guaranteed by the county, and how does that work? Even if it's placed on the tax rolls and sent as a property tax to that same individual who's our
Right.
customer, but what if they don't pay their property taxes? How does the county guarantee that payment to us?
They do pay the district, since it is on the teeter plan, and they themselves go after the property owners, because the county then would receive any interest due, any penalties and interest for not paying their taxes on time. So they assume the risk, but they also get the reward of the interest. We don't charge interest on outstanding amounts, the county does.
So when we turn this list over to the county to be added to the property tax bills, we receive a payment initially up front?
No, it comes in the form of the supplemental tax distributions. The county has, when they send out the bill, you pay in December and you pay in April, your property tax. The county gives us our first distribution sometime middle to the end of January. That generally does not include delinquencies, because it's secured property, secured taxes. Same way with the second distribution, which we get in May. Then comes the unsecured and the supplementals that come to us in August or July, in which we just received. And it's there where we find most of the delinquencies. And it's there where we get the dollars. There may be a little bit here and there, but most of the time it comes through those supplementals, tax bills. And we got a check or a distribution, and we have to clean up the accounting on it, but so far we've received, I think it's in the realm of, this last installment was $84,000. So we do get it, and then the county goes after the owner. See, because the county can then place a lien on the property, and if the property owner doesn't pay their taxes, they can go towards a tax sale.
So that was the 83,000 towards last year's 119, I think?
Right, and that supplemental end, they get, again, we get a little bit, but most of it comes through the supplemental distribution we get.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on this item up here?
Yes. Having spent some time in county government, I'm keenly aware that sometimes departments don't communicate over there with each other. And there's this kind of a furor of activity going on over there about the planning department evaluating the, I don't know, the dependability or the veracity of some of these applicants for cannabis grows. I mean, all over the county, they've got, I don't know, 400 or 500 of them that they haven't gone through yet. It would seem to me that we should send this list to the planning department so that they could, I mean, they could do a little query on their computer to look at the APNs here, the delinquent APNs, and using the logic that past performance is the best predictor of future performance, and there could be a checkbox on their evaluation of these applicants about whether they're being responsible and paying their bills. So
We can certainly reach out to the planning department and see if they're interested in the information. This information also goes to the treasurer, tax collector, and assessor. So there's, the county in aggregate has the information, but as you said, sometimes there's not always the communication. So we can reach out to the planning department and provide them this information if they so desire.
Yeah,
I would recommend that.
yeah, Russ, because that was a big story a couple of years ago where they didn't have a checkoff on whether or not these cannabis growers had paid their property tax. So, you know, why not?
Yeah.
So here's another.
Well, with the commercial growers, they're, as we voted in last year, they're assessed a $2 per square foot fee. The due date on out, their first $1 payment, it's split, which would be up to $22,000 for a 22,000 square foot. Anyway, that was due July 17th. So I think right there, any folks who didn't pay that on July 17th should also come to the top of their evaluation of,
Right.
Applicants and things. So that's a bigger, I'm estimating that to be a bigger issue, the $22,000 owed if they don't pay it, or than $1,100 here or there, so to speak.
Well, I'm aware of at least one applicant that paid their $5,000 application fee, but the county was oblivious to the fact that they hadn't paid $35,000 worth of taxes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that if I was a grower, I would pay the $22,000 and let some of this other stuff that doesn't seem to be important enough to bring it to anybody's attention, let it go.
Or if you're a landowner and not a grower, you'd want to make sure that's paid.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm just throwing it out there that you can say, here's some information that might be helpful to you, but let them run with it. It's not our job to police it, but
Yeah.
the information is king, right?
Okay, any further comments? Any public comment? This is an action item.
Okay, I move that we approve the, what are we doing here? We're letting the
Delinquent charges.
Calaveras County Board of Supervisors and the audit, send this list to the supervisors and the auditor to include these delinquent charges on the county tax bills, or
Se-
so that we get paid.
Second.
A little more of a motion than needed. We got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes, 401. Mr. Meyer, you're up again. Update on the financial analysis study, 4G.
It will take me a moment to get the PowerPoint up, and I'm anticipating at least a 30-minute discussion.
That'd be a good time for a 30-second break.
Can we take a 2-minute break?
A 2-minute break. Tom's chomping at the bit.
This meeting is dragging.
Okay, we're back in session. New business, 4G, update on financial analysis study. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, Mr. Vice President, members of the board. This presentation today is a continuation of the item that was brought before you at the June 8th workshop. This was also discussed July 18th at the Finance Committee meeting. It's an updated version of the presentation we made. And Tom and I, or Tom will be doing most of the presentation here. I'll interject in a few slides, but it kind of takes us from June 8th to today and what we've done and how we've looked at it, reviewed numbers, and we're bringing it back for your board. This is not an item where today you're going to adopt the plan, but we do want comments from you and a recommendation to bring it forward to at the August 9th meeting for adoption. And just also to let you know, if you weren't aware, there are donuts in the back corner. You know, thanks to Tom and HDR for that one. He takes good hints, right?
I remember that. Glad he remembered.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to bring Tom Gould back up to the podium, and he'll continue with the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, good morning. I think Jeff gave us a good introduction as to where we're headed today, but again, what we've done is we've gone back and updated the preliminary draft results of the financial plan, or in other words, your revenue requirement analysis, and it looks at both the water and sewer for the operating and capital needs. And again, what we want to try and do is get board comments and direction on this. One of the things I think that's really important is to kind of understand where we may be headed. So what we did was we tried to put together a little graphical depiction here of sort of the process. And you'll see in the upper left-hand corner we have the big picture. And the big picture basically is that we're looking at the water and sewer financial plans, and we're trying to determine the funding needs and identify funding gaps. And that's where we were last time. That's still where we're at. What we've done is we've updated the financial plans. And so we're moving on to box number 2, or to the right-hand side, which is the board will receive the plan, acknowledge the funding gaps if you do want to acknowledge the funding gaps, and basically says, well, this is the starting point of where we're going to leap off from. And that's essentially what we're trying to do today and at the next meeting. So the question becomes, how do we address those funding gaps? And that's where we start to move down the page and around the corner here. And we'll need to come back to you with strategies to address the funding gaps. And those can be a myriad of opportunities. We'll look at efficiencies, cost reductions, revenue enhancements, and ultimately there'll probably need to be a rate transition plan. And that is that we'll have to adjust and adopt rates. But through that process, again, we'll have board input and feedback through that process of how you want to address those funding gaps. And ultimately, we need to come back to a board decision. And the board decision is to accept the efficiency reductions and revenue enhancements. In other words, how to address those funding gaps, accept the rate transition plan, and ultimately adopt revised rates through a Prop 218 hearing process and so forth. So let's just stop and see if there's any questions or concerns about that process. Hopefully that makes it clear. So again, we're sort of still back up on the upper left-hand corner, and that's what I want to talk about today. So at the June 8th presentation, we talked about a number of different things. In fact, Sean Korn was here, who's the project manager. He's actually on vacation this week. I can't imagine that, having a week off in July. But so I'm filling in for him. But we reviewed the goals and objectives last time. And ultimately, if you wanted to summarize it into one sentence, it is that we want to have adequate and prudent funding levels for both the operations and the capital improvement funding needs of the district. And so that's the objective that we've gone through in this process. So we developed a separate analysis for both water and sewer, and those are 5-year analyses. And we went and used the budgeted levels of expenses and projected off of those. And beyond that, we're escalating costs using escalation factors and annual inflationary factors. So that's sort of where we were, and what we want to do is talk about what we learned out of that process. So the last time Sean was here, we went through the numbers. And what we discovered with it was that the sewer operational revenue was insufficient to fund sewer operations. And remember, there's two components to this. There's the operations and the capital side. The capital needs were also exceeding the funding opportunities. So what we concluded was that we needed to go back, look at our numbers a second time, realign the capital plan, smooth some things out, but also look at the allocations of some of the costs between water and sewer. And that was what we did primarily since the last time we visited with you. We went back, reconfirmed some of the allocations and so forth. So with that, I'm going to let Jeff talk a little bit about what's changed since the last time we got together, because he's more familiar with the allocation process.
If you remember at the June 8th meeting, when Sean and Tom presented the numbers on the sewer side, we had a funding gap of in excess of $1 million. And it prompted myself and others to take a step back and say, why are we over $1 million short? There's only two real equations variables in this equation: revenues and expenditures. We felt very comfortable with the revenue side, but it prompted us to go back and look at the expenditure side. And in expenditure side, you have salary and benefits and services and supplies. Yes, we have debt service, and we were comfortable with those numbers. Capital outlay, we were comfortable with those numbers. When you look at how the district historically has... Yes, sir.
When you say that you're comfortable with the numbers, that has a different meaning than you're confident about the accuracy.
I am confident about the accuracy of debt service and capital outlay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Salary and benefits have historically been allocated based on two ratios. And those ratios are within the utility department. We look at how we allocate salaries and benefits, and for the most part, historically, we looked at 57% of the salaries and benefits went to water, 43 sewer. Well, in my mind, when you look at 13,000 water accounts and 4,800 sewer accounts, let's take a look at that and ground truth it. We also use a methodology for everybody else in the district, and that's historically been a 74-26% based on the percentage of water accounts to total accounts, sewer accounts to total accounts. It's prorated. We said, let's go back and look at that. The next thing we wanted to do is on the revenue side, and this is something that Director Strange has talked about in regards to maybe we can help out the sewer fund to get our debt service coverage ratio up. And I've mentioned this, let's go back and look at property tax revenues to see how they are set up, to see if they can be used. We know in totality what our property tax revenues are, but how do we split that up? Because historically, we've used 85, or last few years, 85% of those to the operating fund, 15% to special projects. But we've also then further delineated, split those funds out based on that 74-26 ratio. So what we looked at doing is, since we have ratios, let's go back and ground truth those ratios. And that was part of this process. Also through this process, we discovered that capital outlay, those are the things like trucks, some equipment purchases, SCADA upgrades, those type of things that are in our operating budget under the capital outlay, that had been inadvertently placed in the CIP budget in the June 8th numbers. So we shifted those back to the operating. Didn't make things better for the operating fund, but it better aligned our numbers to what we budget and what we project for. So going back and looking at these, Teresa and Jesse of Utilities was a big help here. The biggest adjustment we made was in how we allocate utilities, salary, and benefit costs. And it was that percentage. She did a survey with all her employees and all her supervisors and basically said, on average, on a 40-hour work week, How many hours do you employee X work in water and sewer? Some of it varied. Some of them were 100% water, some were 100% sewer. A lot of them were in between. But when we put those numbers in aggregate, it didn't come out to 57 and 43%. It was more, it came out to be 64% water, 36% sewer. So what that has done effectively is shift some of the costs away from sewer, which was getting a much heavier percentage of salary and benefits, over to the water side. In totality, the total number didn't change. It's just how they're allocated between the funds. In bottom line, what this means is less cost is going to sewer, so they're less in the hole. But it's more reflective and it's more fact-based on how we actually spend our time on these two different enterprise funds. Because remember, rate revenues in sewer have to cover the cost in sewer and vice versa in the water fund.
Jim, maybe you could
Just to interject, those ratios, so the ones that we were at, the 57-43 that we've been at for some period, that had been in place for more than a decade. So, you know, as part of all of this effort, we really want to make sure we're using the best information, we're ground truthing it, as Jeff said, and that things most accurately reflect reality today, so that we show that they are proportional and they are appropriate and how things are being allocated. So as part of this, I think we really need to set the expectation that we are going to have a cycle, you know, so maybe a 5-year cycle to come back, and we will come back and revise and review, do the same survey, and update these on that cycle, so we make sure things are fresh. But I think that's an important, really, value added as part of this, is that we really, because if we're called to, you know, to explain why it is that we you know, have these this allocation of expenses, to say, well, we did it, you know, 12 years or so ago, and that's what we continue to use. To me, that's not good enough. We need to do better than that, and I think this puts us in that position to do it.
The other thing we did was to take a look at how we proportionally allocate all the other employees that are not in utilities and their services and supplies. Historically, that's been 74% water, 26% sewer. That is, again, a number that's at least a decade old, and that was the proportion of the individual accounts, water and sewer, to the total number of accounts. Just in rough numbers, we have about 13,000 water accounts, 4,800 sewer. So if you add those together, and then you can find the percentages. I went back and revisited that. I actually went back to fiscal year 13-14 and looked at the billings that we had and the number of accounts. Our billing summaries that we get internally shows you how many, for each cycle, how many number of accounts water, how many sewer. Going back, I went back to 13-14, looked at all those numbers, and they consistently showed it should be 73-27. And you say, wow, 1%. But it goes back to what Dave had said. It's important that our numbers are fact-based and are tied to the current numbers. What this did effectively is shift a little bit more to the sewer side and took away some of the burden on the water side. Yes, sir.
When the survey was taken that Teresa and Jesse undertook, and you came up with the 30, it was 64-36, is that?
Yes.
How accurate is that? I mean, is that's based on talking to employees and asking what they did that week or that month or recently?
It's recently on average, and it's not 64-36 each employee.
I certainly
yeah.
understand that. It's
Okay.
64-36 water versus sewer.
Yes.
And what all the employees that were questioned had answered, and it's the aggregate of everybody.
Yes.
Okay.
The methodology I use, she had it by employee. One had, and you're looking at a 40-hour work week, and she had the numbers for each individual. So I looked at two different ways. I could go in and plug in the numbers for each individual, and I have a salary and benefits spreadsheet that I did this for. went in and checked the percentages, and I determined what the allocation was to water and sewer for that department. Then I looked at everybody in aggregate and came up with a 64-36. And I looked at the two totals. They were very close to the two different methodologies, each individual versus in aggregate. One of the processes we use to allocate costs within our payroll system, we have the ability to plug in, when they process payroll, how we allocate those costs between 300 water and 500 sewer. We could have chosen to go in and change each and every person to their 10%, 0%, 50%, that allocation. Or we could choose to do in aggregate the 64-36. Knowing that people's work habits or their duties may change slightly from month to month or week to week, we chose the aggregate method because it would help take into account some of those ups and downs and peaks and valleys. It's also easier when we go back and make changes in the payroll system, the accounting system, to have that one number.
Do we have confidence that in 6 months you do that exact same survey with those exact same employees, that they would give the same answer, that in the last 6 months that they had their water and wastewater experience would be similar to as to 6 months before? Is every 6-month period or 12-month period or 3-month period going to be the same for every employee?
Exact numbers, I don't think so, but very close. And that's why I chose, instead of doing it individually, I looked at aggregate, because if one person may spend more time on water than sewer, and then it goes back the other way, I'm thinking you're going to find balances. Some will shift more one way, some will shift to the other. That's why I'm looking this at an average in aggregate, to take care of those ups and downs.
And we have confidence in this number. We think it's, it's balancing the administrative burden of doing this, and certainly if we updated it on a high frequency basis, then we might get, it might improve on the accuracy, but it would be a very inefficient way to deal with it, but given our staff time and resources, it would be a burden. So that's why I'm suggesting we come back on, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's more frequently than that, but we do that check-in. I think what we're all in agreement is that waiting more than a decade is not adequate,
Okay,
And-
thanks.
Go ahead.
And Teresa, can you come to the podium? Thank you.
Jeff and I also talked about it because we looked at the job descriptions, the performances, as well as talking to the individuals. We also are looking at possibly, when our guys do their time cards, they put 300 for water, 500 for sewer. This would actually do a better job of accuracy for us at all times. Like meter readers, they're strictly water. They're 100%. They're not really going to change. They don't get 2% for sewer, so they're not going to touch it. That type of thing. You've got most of our distribution in 2 sites. They do nothing but distribution. They don't do any wastewater whatsoever. So there you have those situations. So some of those aren't going to move at all. But we thought maybe down the line here, we'll see how we can manage with our time sheets and everything else to say 300, 500. We make our wastewater people do that because they have to have time in. So this is a way for accounting for their time in wastewater to get their treatment one. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
And basically, that's historic information that can be captured within the timesheet that we can then use to go back and to check this ratio against it at some periodic basis to see if we need to make any adjustments.
Great, thanks.
And just as a footnote on those same timesheets, this is where we have the employees who work on capital R&R projects or CIP projects put down their project time, so we can track by each pay period how many hours were worked and the dollars and cents that were associated with that, and that's how they get charged to the project. So this payroll system is a very valuable tool, and we're looking at better and better ways to utilize that information. And looking at this, we're always reevaluating, are we doing it the best way, or are there options, or what more information can we garner from this?
Thank you.
Everybody ready to move on? Nope.
Well, I just wanted to make an observation that although the percentage on the other departments did go up 1%, it's, when you factor in that against the larger utilities department, it doesn't, it would not, in my mind, change the 6436. It's not a significant, you're not throwing more weight over to the sewer.
Right. Just as a footnote, I believe the numbers are, we have 65 FTE, 46 of those work in utilities. So the significant portion of our costs in salaries and benefits and services and supplies is in the utilities department. And we also looked at how we allocate their service and supply costs. And I know I'm providing you way too much detail, and you say, Jeff, you know, enough is enough. But
You're a mind reader.
If you remember, under your budget, service and supplies, there's chemical costs, there's vehicle costs, there's all the different equipment costs and so forth. When our guys in the field purchase something, they create a purchase order. And in that purchase order, they have to identify, is it Fund 300 or 500? And remember, we do fund accounting. We have 3 funds we use. 101 for general, 300 for water, 500 for sewer. So when they get these make these purchases, they identify 300 or 500. So when those are actually paid, the accounting system puts it into the different funds. So we know what's going on. But there are some costs, some general costs that are charged to 101. And at the end of each month, we have to, accounting allocates those to the 300 and 500 fund. Fuel, we don't, that goes into a general cost. All fuel purchases, diesel, things like that. Auto repairs, some general equipment, materials and supplies. We looked at that ratio as well, which was basically 55 water, 45 sewer. We looked at that, we decided to also adjust that to the 6436. Again, we wanted to make sure our numbers and our allocations were as updated as possible for this process. See, by the time you're done, you guys are going to be accountants just like me.
You can sit for the exam.
Yeah.
And have nothing to account.
Okay, I'm going to move on. I don't know if anybody else wants to, but I will. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the capital funding plans. And here's some summary of the changes and assumptions that we used. Jeff had mentioned as part of the review process that there was a minor amount of capital that was moved from the CIP funding portion of the model to the operating portion of the model. Again, it's a very minor portion, but it was about $300,000. So that has a slight impact on the operating budget. One important assumption that's included within this is no increases or decreases in the R&R revenues. And I want to talk about that just for a second, a little bit off script here, but you know, that is a critical portion to your funding of your capital plans as you go through time. And if you take that away or don't adjust it over time, then you are essentially lowering the amount of capital investment that you're making in the system. And so what you need is a long-term stable funding source for your capital program, and that's one of the major portions of it, is that R&R funding. So we're supportive of keeping that in place and making sure that over time that we adjust that as needed. But at this point, we've assumed no increase in the R&R revenues within the financial model. We've also assumed some grant funding on both the water and the sewer side. In this case, we're talking about the 100% grant funding for the West Point project. And we did refine the capital program a little bit, so if you compare presentations from last time to this time, you'll see the capital numbers have moved around a little bit. But what we're trying to do, again, is try and minimize impacts as we go through time and figure out the best way to manage these investments and minimize rates as we go through time.
Tom, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable, though, making that assumption that we're not going to have to increase our R&R revenues?
Well, let's just put it this way. Let's go through the capital plan, then I'll come back and give you an opinion. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. So here's the summary of the water capital funding plan. And I want to point out a few things on this particular page. And one is that when you look at the amount of revenue coming through the door, and you'll see a line here, this is rather small, I apologize, but you'll see that from 2017 through 2022-23, so if you sum up these numbers here, that's roughly about $20.3 million. So you have about $20.3 million of revenue coming through the door. But then if I drop down and I look at my capital outlays, you can see that a couple of things. I've got a fairly large amount of capital projects. That's about $32.8 million. So we've got a gap in terms of the total funding for, and this is only water, for water of about $12 million. And so along the way, there are other funding sources. So it's not just strictly the revenue from the R&R revenue, but you'll notice down below here that we've got some other funding levels, and one is grant funds. So this is great. We've got about $3.8 million coming through the door in terms of grants. But we're also using reserve funds. And so over time, what we're going to do is a combination of the revenues coming through the door, plus the grant funds, plus we're going to draw down the reserves as we go through time. Now, the question that Director Strange asked was, we had made an assumption within this model is, can we go through time without an adjustment to the R&R fund and fund all the capital projects? The answer is yes, but there is a cost associated with that. And ultimately, if you come down to the bottom line here, you'll see that our ending fund balance will decrease as we go through time. So the question becomes, what should be our target ending fund balance? And I think that's something that we're going to have to address as we go into this question of strategies and how to address these potential funding gaps. But that would be one thing that I think we had on our checklist from the Finance Committee was, how do we come down and create a policy to establish a minimum funding balance here, if you recall that discussion. And so that's the important part of this. So the important thing to take away from this is that we've got more capital projects than we have revenues coming through the door. The other thing is that those capital projects, when you look at those, they're kind of a lumpy function. In other words, they're large in one year, then they may go down, they may go up. So the challenge from a capital funding program is how to fund that as you go through time without raising rates and lowering rates, raising rates, lowering rates. And so that's what we've tried to do, is smooth this out as we go through time. So I don't know that this is a yes or a no answer, but I think that that's one of the things that has to come into play as we start looking at the funding gap and funding strategies. Is this still a reasonable assumption that we have no adjustment to the R&R rates?
Is that done through scheduling, possibly? Scheduling of the projects from one time period to another?
I guess I don't quite fully understand your question.
When you have a lot of capital outlay for
Yes.
R&R projects in one particular year is because we decided to do a project that year.
Right, and it may be a large project, or it may be a small kind of project, or a project that you consistently do, like
And then what
main
I'm saying
replacements.
is a possible solution is delaying that project until the funds build up to do that project.
That is one possible solution.
Okay.
But this is why we're in such trouble in this country with deferred capital. That when you look at things, we've deferred, and now we've got this huge backlog of deferred projects. So I can say yes, that's certainly an option. It's not, from my perspective, a preferred approach. And I think one of the things that you'll see as we go through this presentation, it talks about the fact that if you take care of your system and maintain it properly, what you will find is that your operating costs will be lower as you go through time. So there is a benefit to taking care of your system. It's just like your car. If you don't want to change the oil, that's great. Ultimately, it runs out of oil, the engine seizes up, and you've got problems. And so what we want to do is, like your mission says, take care of your system, make sure that we recognize the value of this resource, and so forth. But that certainly is one of the strategies that we used when we came back here, was can you slide a project out or slide a project forward to smooth out that function and work within a positive way.
Because in that, you're looking at how important is it? You know, you might decide next month that project X is number one, whereas in six months from now, you might decide that really doesn't need the work.
Right.
So
So
then-
I talk about projects, I don't think about them as just capital projects, but I think about three types of capital projects. So the first type is what I call R&R type projects. We've got an existing facility, it needs to be replaced, we need to take care of it. It's old, obsolete, not working properly. That's the first type of project. The second is a growth or expansion related project. We've run out of capacity, we need to expand it, away we go. And there's different ways that you fund these things, but expansion projects can be funded through growth funds. And then the third type of project is a regulatory project. And a lot of times if you have a regulatory project, it dictates when it needs to be built. There is no just, well, let's push it out another 10 years and we'll build it when we want to build it. It doesn't quite work that way. So where you have some flexibility is how you address the R&R and the expansion portion of this. So think about it from that perspective, because each one of those has different ways to be funded. And in particular, it's the R&R piece, taking care of the existing system that people sometimes neglect along the way, and that's the piece that sort of disappears within your rates.
And then just to note, these are the capital outlay here, and the reference to the fact that we have more projects than we have funding for, and what is our target balance? These are just the planned projects, and as our experience over the last couple of years, we're gonna have emergency projects that are not in our plans right now, and we have to have the flexibility to deal with that. And I know you're gonna reference that, but that's got to be part of our policy as we move forward too on ending balance.
Yeah, so the last piece I'll show you here, I brought a little arrow up, but when you look at the ending target balance, you start up here, we have about 10.7 or 10.8 million. When we get down to the end here, we have about 1.3 million. What we've done in this plan is we've drawn down reserves approximately $9.4 million. So that's the question that's sort of on the table, is that acceptable? And if not, there's, again, different ways you can address this. We can look at the capital projects, you can look at the adjustments as we go through time. There's different ways that we can address this. Any other questions? Let's go to the sewer then. Sewer looks very similar, and I'll do roughly the same thing. When you come up here and look at the revenues, and so as you go through time, the revenues here for the 5-year or 6-year period, I should say, is $7.2 million. When you come down to the total capital outlay line, that one is $16.9 million. So again, we have more capital projects than we have funding coming through the door. But again, one of the sources of funds that we have is grant funding. And again, this is the sewer utility. And so there's about $4.9 million of grant funding that's assumed within this plan. So that helps take care of part of that funding gap. And again, grant funding is one of those things where it's certainly not like going out for a loan where it's pretty much you're assured of getting it. Grant is essentially something that you have to apply for, hope that you're the best in line, and away grant funding goes. And so there was a question, I think, when we met with the committee, and it was, well, we haven't assumed any grant funding out in future years, and I think that's a conservative approach, is to assume at this point in time there will be no grant funding. But if there is, then that helps out, obviously. And so, go ahead.
Other funding
Yes.
is, you know, that's quite significant.
Yeah, Jeff, do you remember exactly what the other funding was here?
Part of what you see in the earlier years is related to some of the improvements in the Wallace area, and the board created an assessment district to help fund those projects that we saw as necessary to bring them up to our standards. The other amount is what Tom was alluding to earlier, as far as one of the 3 types of projects, expansion-related projects, and a portion of those projects being completed in the sewer fund is also, they will take advantage to increasing the capacity. When engineering looks at a project, they look at, is it completely R&R, rehabbing the existing structure, or is there a portion of this project that expands the capacity of our system? If it does expand the capacity of our system to allow new customers to be hooked up to the system, then you look at the type of funding that comes from those expansion funds. I think we talked about this, Director Thomas, at the Finance Committee meeting. When you have capacity fees, they can only be used to fund the debt service on previous expansion or future expansion. And that's where a portion of this other funding is coming from. I believe it's a Copper Cove Expansion Fund to expand some of the capacity in this Copper Cove sewer.
So one other item I would point out is there is assumed borrowing within this model. So you can see out here in 2019, 2020, we have assumed the need for $1 million in borrowing. Again, this is one of those things where we can look at the capital projects, we can look at all kinds of different things to assume different funding approaches. But for now, this is the assumption that's contained within the model. And ultimately, this capital funding model looks similar to what we saw on water, where we begin with a funding balance of about $3 million up here at the top. By the time we get to the end, we have an ending fund balance of about $1.2 million. So not quite as dramatic, but it is $1.8 million of reserve funds that are being used for purposes of funding capital projects. And ultimately, again, this model has assumed no adjustments to the R&R rates as we go through time. And again, that's subject to the discussions that will occur after this meeting, whether that's something that you would be willing to look at. Okay, questions? Okay, so let's try and summarize what we just talked about on the capital funding plans. Again, the water CIP, the first one we looked at, will not require any borrowing. That's great. If we can avoid borrowing, that's a good thing. And on the sewer CIP, again, we just mentioned that there was be at least $1 million or more for the Pond 6 expansion, and it's, again, based on regulatory requirements. So again, it's one of those kind of projects where we may not be in complete control of the schedule or the dollars.
Yeah, and Tom, excuse me, I just wanted to mention, you know, especially coming out of the experience of this last year with all of the high flows and everything, we are on notice as every agency across the state in the sanitary sewer business that the state is moving forward with really pushing in those you know, permit conditions and the improvements to meet the obligations that each agency has under its permit. So these are not things that are discretionary. And, you know, we fortunately, and this is a tremendous asset of the organization, our goodwill with the regulatory community, that gives us some flexibility, hopefully, in the timing of these projects. But the reality is we are going to have to continue to implement these capital projects as well as upgrading our permits. And it's why some of the things we've looked at in the past, maybe as possibly discretionary, maybe like a West Point Wilsonville consolidation. Now I think it's pretty clear to us that that's not in that's going to be a mandatory project in one form or another that's going to have to be paid for. So that's definitely on our as part of our thought process in developing this.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I realized I just said that you weren't in control of the dollars. I realize. Yes, you are. It's what I intended to say. It's not a discretionary project. And so this middle bullet that I have, we've talked about this. I mentioned that you know, we do need to take care of facilities, and we can't defer capital projects in order to try to keep rates as low as possible. We need to take care of our system, and when we do, the O&M costs will follow, and they'll be lower as we go through time. The other thing that we haven't really touched on up to this point is this thing called debt service coverage. And debt service coverage, again, is a financial measure of your ability to repay your debt. It's important because it's a legal obligation in some cases on your debt, but it also is for qualifying for grant loans. So you need to have the ability to pay those back, and that's the issue that's on the sewer side. One of the things that we do want to look at as we go forward, we'll be looking at those minimum reserve levels. We've talked about that, and the funding of those projects as we go through time. So with that, anything else you want to talk about? Okay. Let's talk a little bit of, and Dave just made this comment, that the capital plan that you just looked at doesn't contain all the future capital projects. There's projects beyond this 5-year period. So capital projects, yes, we've got a lot right now, but they continue to go on through time. And that's why we suggest consistent and adequate funding as we go through time. So these are some projects. If you have questions about any of them, we'll be glad to answer those. But it just gives you a sense that there is more beyond this 5-year period.
Yeah, and this is by no means a complete list. There are many more. I'm sure Charles could do a 2-day session on all the projects he regrets that we don't have on the 5-year list. So.
Okay, so let's summarize the operations side of this, which is the water revenue requirement. And the first thing I'll point out is I'll draw a little line here, or a little square box around the total revenue. And the majority of the revenue that comes through is, again, from rate revenues. And this is the same exhibit that we went through last time when Sean was here. But essentially, for the water utility, we have about $10.4 million of revenue coming through the door. With customer growth through time, we'll see about $11 million. Now, we are not assuming at this point in time any revenue adjustments within this rate revenues. This is before any assumed rate adjustments. So we're just going to let you look at the base revenues, see what drops out, determine the funding gap or the deficiency of funds, and then we can figure out what we need to do. The second part of this is the expense side. And on the expenditure side, this is the part where Jeff was talking about the allocation between water and sewer and so forth. So these numbers have changed a little bit. And you can see on the expense side, the total operation and maintenance expenses are about, in this 2017-18 period, about $10.5 million or $10.6 million. So you can see that there is already a funding gap in this initial year. We add to that debt service, but we've got some transfers that offset that. So our total amount of funding needed is about $10.1 or $10.2 million. So we have a slight balance of funds. That's good news. But as we go through time, you'll see that we are starting to build up a slight deficiency. This is a little different than what you saw in the last presentation. And again, it's in part driven by that reallocation between water and sewer. So at the end of this period, when you get out to 22-23 time period, we have a deficiency of about $1.4 million. If you compare that $1.4 million to the total rate revenues coming through the door at the top of the $7.8 or $7.9 million, that's roughly about a 17.8 deficiency, 17.8% deficiency. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to raise your rates today by 17.8%. Let's don't go there quite yet. But what that means is that if you adjust your rates through time, if that's the only way that you want to look at addressing this funding gap, that's probably a 3 to 4% adjustment per year over this 5-year period of 2018-19 through 2020-22. The one thing about the water utility, and this is pretty much the comment I would make at every utility in California at this point in time, is that the rates have been slightly unpredictable, or the revenues that you derive from your rates have been unpredictable. Part of that is driven by the drought that we have just gone through. But the question becomes, we have such reduced consumption. The question is, will that pop back up a little bit, or will it stay at the current levels? What will people do, and how will they react now that there's we're supposedly out of the drought, and how will they react, and will consumption levels change? So we've been conservative in terms of our projections of the consumption levels, so that has an impact upon this particular line. And so that's a second thing that we'll probably be taking a look at as we go through this process. So that's the summary of the water financial plan. And so our total balance or deficiency of funds, again, is the bottom line here. This is what we're referring to as the funding gap. So when we come back next time, we'll be talking about strategies to reduce that funding gap, and ultimately, what do we need to do to rates? Questions? Okay, let's go to the sewer. Sewer is very similar to what you just saw for water in terms of the layout of the various lines. We have the total revenue, but I'm going to just pop this one up for, the second one here, which is that the total revenues that you see coming through the door for sewer are $5.2 million. When you come down and you look at the operating costs, or the O&M, it's $6.1 million. So there's a clear deficiency here in terms of the dollars. When we add in the debt service, the transfers, and so forth, there's a deficiency shown on each one of these years. And as you get out to the far right-hand side, this deficiency out in the final year is about $1.2 million. That's roughly about 26% of the current sewer rate revenues. So for this particular utility, if we did only one way to address the funding gap, and that was through rate adjustments, we'd probably be looking at, on average, 5 to 6% adjustments per year over that 5-year period. Now, again, that's the key question, is how do we address these funding gap issues? And there are different ways that we can do that. So let me just stop here before I jump into that and see if there's questions about the sewer utility.
And just to be clear, that's not something we would ever recommend at a staff level, that we only address these through the revenue side. As we've said since the very beginning, it has to be revenues and expenditures, and we have to be thoughtful and consider every possible alternative, and that's why we're taking the time and doing the diligence, and why we've invested in expert guidance from Tom and his staff on this.
Okay, so let's talk about the water financial plan, try and summarize that. Again, on the water side, and this is true also on the sewer side, that there's two components to the rate. There's operations and the R&R piece. And on the operational side, the rates were last increased in July 2011. So it's been some time, and that may play in part of the reason why we're seeing the deficiency that we're seeing. Again, the other part may be the allocation of the costs. Those have changed over time. Again, conservation has had an impact on this particular utility. Revenue stability is an issue. One of the challenges that people have as part of the California Urban Water Conservation Council, the old BMPs, was that they wanted you to put more of your revenue into the consumption portion of the rate and less into the fixed charges. And that has now changed over time. And so we'll be talking about that once we ultimately get into rates and discussing that. This particular year that we're in, the 17-18, is what we're calling the bridge year. So there's no water rate increases assumed during this time period. But ultimately, beyond that time period, we're going to have to address the funding gap and figure out a way to address that as we go through time. And again, this is the utility where we were showing a deficiency of roughly 3 to 4% of rate revenues. On the sewer side, just to be expedient, I'll say it's basically the same as what you saw on the water side. Again, there's two components to the rates, but this is, again, the utility that's probably the more concerning of the two. We're showing a larger deficiency, and it's roughly in the range of 5 to 6% per year, the current funding gap if you do nothing else. The challenges of this particular utility are a little different. Excuse me. It's a smaller customer base, a smaller amount of revenues, and at the same time, we've got the increasing regulatory requirements, which poses some challenges on the capital side. So, with that, maybe Jeff, you want to take first cut at the funding gap discussion and development of staff strategies?
Certainly. As has been mentioned all along, we're going to be looking at a multitude of different ways to address this funding gap. As Dave mentioned, as we've mentioned, Tom has mentioned, first thing we're going to look at is our expenditures. That's up, and take a look at see how we can reduce expenditures down to a level that helps to balance out this process so that we don't have to rely upon a 100% rate increase. Nobody wants 100% revenue to cover this process, because in looking at this district, I look at this as a long-term investment. As Tom mentioned, our R&R program is a long-term investment into our capital program, eventually bringing down the cost of O&M. We also have to look long-term investment into running this as operationally. The district will be here forever. This is, in my view, this is our customers' infrastructure. This is their system, and we want to make sure that we provide adequate support for their system. For them, like the water system, water's for life. There's no substitute for them when it comes to this. However, there is going to be an opportunity here for us to take a look at how we operate and what we spend our money on, and we can look at, and I go back to what Natasha said, how people use their water, needs and wants. She used that phrase, people need to look at how they're using their water for needs and wants. We're going to be having to go through that same exercise to focus on what is actually needed and what is actually a want to have. And we do that on our own individual budgets. These are the things we need to pay, our utilities, our chemical costs, all these things that are part of this, operating the systems. Then we can look at wants and actually see, is this something we perhaps can do without, and will it still support our mission statement? We've got to get down to the basics, because what we do now will affect us 10, 15, 20 years from now. So that's the process we're going to be looking at. And I know you would say, Jeff, why didn't you do it during the budget process? We continue to look at that, but the other part of it is, I've been looking at maybe 2 years, and we talked about the $1 million deficit. We've got to get a much longer view now, because what we do in this 5 years is going to lay the groundwork for 10, 15, 20 years. The other thing that we're going to be doing, and once we look at reduction and allocate those costs between the water and sewer fund, is how do we utilize revenues? Revenue enhancements, and what kind of phrase is that? Well, part of it is, how do we look at the consumptive side? I'd love to get our consumptive revenues back up to help the water fund. Joel has started some outreach in some of this, but there's still a number of customers out there that say, hey, look, I've already done away with my lawn. I'm not going to plant it again. Or I see that I'm going to change my habits forever. We've got to get a pretty good handle on how consumptive revenues are going to go moving forward. I don't have I won't have the numbers until probably October as to how we have done during the summer months, because the delay in our billing. But there may be an uptick that we can enhance our consumptive revenues, and that will reduce the pressure on the water fund. And that comes from customer outreach. We can look at our fee structure. One of the things we've talked about is, are our fees that we charge for services adequate enough to cover our costs? Some of our fees were last reviewed 10 years ago, and we may not be being able to recover all our costs for, like, when we do backflows testing, or when we do door tags and lock-offs, or we do some service calls. Is that enough to close the funding gap? No, but what we want to do is address all those types of revenue that we get to see if there's some additional revenues that are not tied to increasing rates. And so those are the things we're going to be looking at, both on the expenditure side, also on the revenue, non-rate increase revenues, to see if we can close that gap. But as Tom said, when you're looking at this, ultimately, there is going to have to be some type of rate transition plan. We're not ready to say what that's going to be. Our goal is to work on this plan internally, talk to the managers, talk to staff, see what we can do, and then see what we can do as far as looking at that funding gap, allocate a portion of that to the expenditure side, say we can cut X amount of costs or X percentage of costs, and then we can add X percentage of revenue enhancements, but then the rest of it will have to be made up by rate revenues. We will bring that discussion back to your board so that your board is fully aware of it. Go to Finance Committee first. We're looking at going to the Finance Committee in August, then have that, bring those numbers to the board so you can give us direction and say, yeah, I feel comfortable with that ratio. No, I don't. But once we feel comfortable with that ratio, we can then provide direction to HDR to go to that next phase. But we want to check back with you throughout these phases, so that you're comfortable with the direction we're going in.
So I want to hear about a time frame that this is gonna happen. If I remember right, our West Point Woolseyville Consolidation Grant goes away in November, is it?
Towards the end of this year, yes.
Okay, so I don't want to see, let me restate that. I would like to see action by this board that allows us to address that potential termination or the timeframe with that West Point Woolseyville grant to where we've, taken action and we're engaging them and we do not lose that grant opportunity.
And even,
Bottom line.
I agree with you 100%, and it's even more critical now that it's gone from being a nice-to-do project to a need-to-do project.
Exactly.
And what we're looking at is, by the first meeting in September, I want your board to confirm our targets for revenue, or cost reduction, and revenue rate transition plan. At that point, HDR goes forth and does their cost of service study and their rate design, so that by November, December, November timeframe, maybe I'd rather not go as late as December, we come back to your board with a recommendation on what that rate plan would be, the rate transition plan would be. You don't approve the rates because we have to go through the Prop 218 process, but you can start that process in motion so that and we can reach out to the State Water Resource Control Board and say, this is our target, this is where we're going, we're going to be able to meet the bond requirements, the debt coverage ratio, but we'll probably, because there's a minimum of 45-day process between your board setting the 218 process in motion to the actual meeting with the outreach, so we won't be having that hearing until after the first of the year. And I think that will satisfy them, because as long as you say this is our Prop 218 noticing, they know darn well that you're serious about this and you're going through the effort.
Okay, and again, I'll offer to put a tie and jacket and suit on and, ride with you guys up to the state to meet these folks to make sure we don't lose this opportunity.
I'm all behind that. And that's why it's going to be critical to do some outreach at this point. That September meeting, that first meeting in September, because I'm not sure what the calendar is for the end of August. It'll be tough to get this done because these are difficult decisions.
I know.
But can we go back to that decision, the map, please?
Second page.
Okay. After today, I'm basically going to assume that you guys agree with this financial plan, that there's going to be no major changes, and we'll bring it back for adoption.
Before we go past that comment, I'm having some trouble. We're already talking about a rate adoption process and a 218 process. And I'm very hopeful that we can get through this year without having to adopt new rates, and we come up with an alternative plan of something than raising rates.
Understood. I hear you loud and clear,
Okay.
but the numbers are such that there has to be additional revenues. And we have to come up with those additional revenues somehow. And that's where...
And just to be clear, that's not just again, not something that we desire, but that we have to do that to satisfy the state on this. That's part of why we're having to look at this from a multiple year perspective into the future. Well, on the sewer operations, it's already an issue right now. We have a deficiency, but it's really front and center because of the fact that we have to correct that issue to qualify for the grant funds. So while we'll do everything we can to try to come up with part of that formula as being the cost reductions and how we do that over the course of 5 years and still be able to meet and provide safe service and meet our obligations legally. But there's still that can't do. We don't think that can solve the entire problem. And so that, but we don't want to jump ahead and say, okay, here's what we're saying, we have to have in the way of proposed rate increase. We're not there. That requires a lot of analysis, and it requires further decisions by this board about what would even be the amount of the shortfall that we would look to try to design a new rate structure to provide for that. So to be clear on that, and one thing I want to be clear, the public outreach component of this is critically important in it, and it will not begin when we kick off at whatever point in time, if and when we kick off the 218 process. That is not going to be the beginning of that. In fact, that's something I've been talking a lot with Joel and the management team. That's going to start as soon as August, and really August and September have to be dedicated to outreach with stakeholders in the community to really and talk about, and that's why the information in this plan is so important, to talk about the underlying issues and really to explain what we're up against and the approach that we're taking to try to deal with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me, just to clarify in my mind, the reason that we have to, okay, by November, is that when that Wilseyville
Right.
grant is up? We have to show in seeking those grant funds that we can pay a certain, or that we make enough money, or what is that statement?
Yeah, you bet, Jeff. You've been in direct contact with them, yeah.
Yes. Right now, based on what you've seen here,
Right.
we don't make enough money to pay for
Right,
sewer.
no, I know that.
So
And
they
so that-
want, okay, if the state is going to give us a grant for a facility, we have to prove that we can maintain that facility.
Mm-hmm.
And based on our operating costs on sewer, we can't maintain it.
No.
And I want to come back to another number, and it's just not about this grant. There's more to this. Remember when we passed the budget, we had a $1 million deficit, and we used 2 one-time fixes to be able to do that, to balance a budget. Next year, that deficit's going to grow to 1.4 million, the same way in 1920, and it goes out to $2.5 million in fiscal year 22-23.
Right.
So we're going to have to address that, and I want to come back to the bottom right-hand corner, that yellow box, strategies to address the funding gap. That's what we're going to be working on. It's going to be my toolbox that I mentioned. It's going to be cost reduction, but it's going to be very difficult to cut $1.4 million right out of the budget and still fulfill our mission of maintaining public health, safe water, and so forth. But we are going to look at that. We look at revenue enhancements. I'd love for everybody to turn their sprinklers back on, and that would help to be able to adjust that. But I'm not going to, that's going to be a moving target for us, because unfortunately, we're in arrears when we look at the data. I can look at production numbers and know that, oh, production's but up 5%. But how does that translate into revenues? Since the largest proportion of our customers are up in Ebbets Pass, do they get above that threshold of the first 500 CF and get into consumptive revenues? We're going to be looking at that consistently for now through the end of the year, through this entire rate process. Because if we see consumptive revenues back up again, that means we have less to worry about of adding additional rate revenue. But when I say adding revenues, there's a whole slew of things besides just the base rate that we're looking at. And I really want to drive home the fact that it's not just rates, and I do not plan on covering everything with a rate increase.
Yeah, and I hope the board knows, and the public as well, that from staff, proposing an increase in rates is not something we go to unless absolutely necessary. And the fact that we were able to bring forward a recommendation, and the board was able to implement it to cut rates with the elimination of the last rate increase on the R&R program is really proof of that. I mean, there were many projects that you talk about the timing of the projects and how we sequence them and all that. All of that had to be was affected by the fact that we didn't move forward with that last increment of the increase. So again, that we understand. I mean, and I know this is still going to be difficult, no matter how we look at it, but we have to be able, I think we have to be able to say, that we thoroughly analyzed all those things. We did absolutely what we could to capture any other means to make this happen and to address the issue, so that when whatever is proposed in the way of additional rates, we can say we have to have this to meet our legal obligations and to meet our health and safety obligations to the community. So that's why this is such a laborious process and why it's going to take the rest of the year to get through.
It's a shame we weren't doing this a couple months ago.
Yeah.
It really is, and anyway, I'll just bite my tongue on that. My other question, though, is one of the R&R rate increase that we did not approve moving forward. What is the policy if the board decides maybe we want to reconsider that action? How is that is that a 218 process, or?
In council, if you want to, but my sense would be that since you've extinguished that last increment of the rate increase by a formal action of this board, that is no longer an option, that we would have to go through another 218 process.
Okay.
And again, even if you still had that option available to you, that is for the R&R capital project program.
I think initially we delayed it. I think we did have an opportunity to implement it in that next year, but then we didn't.
That's true.
That's true.
Okay.
That's true. There's still that outlying issue about can you repurpose any of the R&R funds for operations. I want to be very clear that is not at all what staff is recommending. We think that that would be a recipe for ultimately driving up our O&M costs and creating problems in future years, because the stuff we're using we're spending this money on infrastructure-wise is old infrastructure that is creating real problems for us and real liabilities, and and again, it's only a small portion of all the things we would like to address. These are the absolute highest priority stuff. So,
And to follow up on that, Dave, going back to the budget, when I talked about transfers in, we had transfers in from the R&R funds into the operating fund. We try to maximize the use of district employees to work on those R&R projects. The pipeline replacement, the engineering, those hours spent on that R&R, which I talked about, project hours that they enter into the payroll system, those hours are reimbursed to the general fund by the R&R programs, which in bottom line is the R&R program in 17-18 is going to contribute about $500,000 or more to the general fund by reimbursing the general fund for time spent on these projects. So in looking at that, we made a conscious effort to use our own staff, their knowledge, their ability to be able to do these projects quickly and have control over them to the best advantage of completing those projects. So that is a source of funding at this point.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. We talked about use of our reserve. What is our reserve now? What?
do you mean in the context of the R&R program and our funds? I think that's, if I'm not mistaken, Tom, that's the beginning and ending balance, and how do we manage that? That's the amount that we have on deposit from the initial loans and from the ongoing collection of R&R fees or rates would be that amount that we have. And I think the thought is, how much do we need to have so that we have that cushion in the event that we need to, from my perspective, the thing I'm most concerned about is the emergency type project, the thing like the Jenny Lind pretreatment project, which never would have, never entered our consciousness until the Butte fire, and then suddenly we have to respond to that. So I think that's a really important part of this, is trying to determine, I don't think we want to run our balances to zero on water or wastewater,
Oh, no,
because
then
I'm guessing our only, okay, and that's kind of the situation we were in pre-R&R. We have no funds to, if something arises, how do we deal with it? We either have to try to find a way to deal with it through O&M, which is frankly almost, we simply don't have it to deal with anything substantial, or we'd have to go out and borrow money to do it. And again, that's part of the thinking, is we want to, while we will have to do some very limited borrowing, we want to limit it, and we want to make sure it's very cost effective and that we don't have to pay any more than we absolutely have to finance that.
My other statement was, or will be the fact that we remember that we came in, the 3 new members to the board, and we wanted to stop the rate increases. So what we stopped was 10%. Because we went 25, we went 15, and then there was going to be 10
In that ballpark, yes.
in the ballpark. No, that was what it was
Yeah,
going
I
to
think-
be.
Yes.
So that, we've already gone a 40% rate increase. So if we look at the fact that we've been here for 4 years, that's 10% every year. So that I wouldn't feel good about going back and bringing back that option of doing an additional 10%. I'm happy with the 4 or the 5% if we have to look at rate increase.
Per annum,
Yes.
yes.
Well, and one of the thoughts is if we have to, and I think we're trying to look at this in multi-years out in the future, and we're trying to, not only to, reduce the amount of additional rates to the absolute minimum that we would have to have, but also how do we do that in looking at it multiple years to try to, one thing I think, I know I've heard it going through rate setting processes, and I know I've heard from staff that similar thing was, people, the public really, and as a, paying bills, I understand, the one thing you don't want is the shock. You don't want people to sit on issues and not address them and then come back later and when things are most expensive and try to, all along it should have been dealt with in a responsible manner so that you could, to one extent, to kick the can and say, future residents, when you're here, you have to pay for all the deferred maintenance and things that weren't dealt with, that should have been dealt with the people before you, but also just the fact that it puts us in a position of doing things in a really not a cost-effective manner. So that's really part of it. How do we do this in a way that, again, is to keep each increment at the amount of as low as we can get it and still meet our needs, our absolute necessity here, and do it in a way that's thoughtful and again, we don't further compound the problem by saying, we're going to try to keep things, we're going to push everything out into the future, or we're not going to take some of it on today. Instead, let's be very thoughtful and deliberate. And all of this and the rate analysis and the cost of service analysis are really going to look at all of those options for us. And frankly, on the water side, there may be some things we can do in the way of trying to deal with the volatility of consumption that may not just be a rate increase. There may be, we're going to look at any and all options for, we're not in the situation some agencies are where their consumptive revenues make up a majority of the water revenue. We have more in the way of base rates, so we're better protected than some, but we know we're still affected by it. And if there's any way that we can try to reduce that volatility so we can avoid the roller coaster. I mean, again, I'm really proud of the fact that we never adopted or brought to the board, or the board never even had to consider a drought surcharge. We didn't, there was not the agencies around us are raising rates when at the same time they're saying you got to use less because we're in a drought and the state's mandating these requirements. We didn't have to do that. So we're going to bring as good a product to the board this time as what we've been able to do in the past.
And just to follow up on that, what we're looking at is a 5-year plan. We're going to be looking at each year to see what we can do in cost. There may be some cost reductions that we're not going to be able to implement in year 1 or year 2, but we can in year 3 and 4, because it's going to have to be strategic. One of the things that we want to look at is, are we right sized for the amount of work we need to do? What does that mean? Do you have the proper employees in the proper classifications, having the proper skills to do the work? So as we go forward and looking at, I think Stacy has mentioned this, transition plans and so forth, because we're going to have retirements coming up. We're going to have regular attrition. How do we utilize that as making sure we have the proper fit for this? And that may not happen to year 4, year 5, but as we look that up, that's going to be part of these tools that will come back and strategies to say, okay, we think in year 1, we can cut 5% or 10%, and then, but year by year 4 and 5, we can cut another 20%. What I'm talking about is of that funding gap, not overall cost, but remember, we're addressing that funding gap that goes from 1.4 to 2.5 million. What can we do to shrink that? What can we do to get more non-rate increase revenue? And I hope I'm clear about that phrase, because there are other revenues that are not associated with rate increase, such as more consumption, that will help bridge that gap. And how can we reach out and make that known to customers out there that, yes, they can use water efficiently and wisely, but still have the lifestyle that they're used to. So those are the things that we're going to be looking at.
No,
But unfortunately, on the sewer side, increasing consumption is not going to help us.
No, I agree, and I think that, you know, your statement that some of those options to us will show themselves down the road,
Yes.
Which means that we can't count on them. And so I think it's, the kick the can down the road is not something I'm willing to do. And, you know, tomorrow, let's get this, you know, get moving towards the resolution, whatever that is. Dave was right in that all agencies around us have increased rates, okay, over this last drought with a surcharge and additional kind of thing. We have not, and I think that's great. At the same time, again, we get into, you know, kicking or hiding, you know, burying the head in the sand kind of thing or whatever, but it is what it is. And the sewer in particular is a huge issue that we need to resolve. And yeah, it's certainly going to take some cost savings, but it's also going to increase, or resolution is an increase in rates. I don't see any other way around that. Especially, you know, looking at our revenues and expenditures. So let's get moving down that process. I mean, that's the bottom line. We don't want to do it, but again, I'm not going to be labeled as one of the directors that just kicked this problem down the road.
No, and I hate that expression, kicking the can down
I know,
the road.
I know.
Yeah, we heard it, and we heard it, and we heard it.
I need clarification. Back on slide 14, you talk about the rates were last increased in 2011. I wasn't around at that time, but I understand from what you're saying that it was an approved stepped increase, and the last step was, he said extinguished, somebody else said postponed. What is the actual status?
And it wasn't in
Yes.
2011, that's
Yeah.
when the action was taken. The rates didn't increase until 2 years later.
Right.
This is rates for operations, so this would have been the last increment of rate increase for operations. Jeff, is that correct? That would have been the
Yes.
last. So basically, rates for operations, water and sewer, have been flat since then, since 2011.
Well, I understand that it was flat, but there was an action on the board, Bertha mentioned when 3 new members came on the board, that they, apparently they were the prevailing voices, and they said, we don't want to implement this last step increase. So where is it now?
That's the R&R, and Jeff, if you
Yes.
want to explain that, so that's the other component of the rates.
Right. If you look up on that first bullet, it says water rates include 2 components, the O&M, the operational side, and the R&R side. In 2007, the board adopted a 5-year rate plan for everything. It went up, and the last year that increase was July 1 of 2011. Rates did not change, overall rates did not change again until July 2013. When the board adopted that rate increase and we went through the 218 process, we identified a need to add only to our R&R program. We did not add any additional money to fund operations and maintenance. So we actually, when we increased the rates, we have 2 components. The R&R component revenues get split off the bill and go straight into the R&R funds. The operations component sticks and stays into the operations side. We have not increased the money that goes into funding day-to-day operations.
Okay, but
I get
Russ
all
wants
that.
to know, When and where is that?
Yeah, what is the status of this anticipated increase that everybody was all upset about, justifiably maybe, but is it something that you can turn it back on?
No.
Or-
That was
That's
my
what Jerry-
question.
that
That was
was-
exactly my question.
Can I answer this?
It's gone away.
Or take a crack at it?
Yeah.
You're the guy in charge. Go ahead.
In 2013 is when when we voted in 2011 to have a rate increase, it was going to start taking place in 2013. The resolution that was adopted at that meeting in July of 2011, or shortly
It's 13.
thereafter, was
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
to have three, out of the next 5 years, have increases of 3 for the first 3 years. When the third year came, we decided to not adopt that, to not implement that third increase that was voted on, started in 2013. So the rates increased in 2013 and 2014, and they were gonna increase in 2015 with no rate increase for 16 and 17 over that 5-year plan. Instead of implementing the increase in 2013, it was delayed at that time. It was delayed to the next year, and we could have, in 2014, implemented that increase. But we, as a board, decided not to implement that increase, and now it's gone away. There is no opportunity to bring that third increase back. Even though it was part of that 5-year plan that we implemented in 2013, it's no longer on the table.
You're certain of that?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the question that Terry asked a few minutes ago, that council responded.
I don't think we can increase it without going through the 218 process again, giving notice and all that. I will confirm that 100%, but I'm almost positive that is.
Well, I'd just like to see the language of the resolution that the board adopted.
But it has to do with 218. It's not the board's resolution. It's the Prop 218, which sets out, which regulates when we can set rates and how we can increase our rates. And you can't do that without a notice and a process. And that, it's not really our board resolution. It's the 218.
No, I'm talking about the board resolution where you set aside that last incremental
Right.
increase. As a ratepayer, I'd like to know whether it would be
You're not
justifiable.
a ratepayer.
I am a ratepayer. In fact, I'm
Yeah.
paying for 2 of them.
We'll provide you.
We'll look at all that. And I'll get you confirmation on that.
Okay, thank you.
And just on point of clarification, that rate increase would have gone into the R&R funds, not into O&M. And what we're looking at here is to fund operations.
Yeah, the other point I would make is that when we talk about a, let's say, 3 to 5% adjustment, that's only on the operations side. So from a customer bill perspective, that doesn't mean that their bill will go up by 3 to 5%. It's some proportion in relationship to the portion that's related to the operations versus the replacement. So,
But I still like those figures better.
Yes.
yeah. Well, of course, everybody does. But
Right.
but let me try and give you. I've been doing this, for almost 40 years and doing a meeting like this every week. So I've heard a lot of arguments about all these things.
Were you doing that in high school or what?
Yeah. So let me give you a couple of perspectives. One is, what does the customer care about? And usually they understand rate adjustments. They don't like them, but obviously they understand them at some level. But the first question they always ask is, well, did you look at the expense side of the equation? There's 2 parts to the equation. There's revenues and their expenses. And you have to be able to answer them that, yes, we've done our due diligence. We've looked at the expense side. We've whittled everything down as best we can. And what we're left with is what we need to do with our rates. The second part of this is kind of coming back to this discussion about 2011 and last time we adjusted the rates. I worked with a citizens advisory committee one time, and the city manager said, well, I don't want just any ordinary citizens advisory committee of just a sprinkling of whoever wants to come. I'm going to select the 6 or 7 top business people in our community, and I want them to be on this advisory committee. And I thought, well, that's an interesting approach. And we all got together. And the first thing that they said was, well, you have to understand that you are running a multi-million-dollar business. So you have to think about it from the perspective that I am responsible for this multi-million-dollar business and for the long-term survival of it and the prudent operation and maintenance of it. And they said, we can't imagine and this was at a city that hadn't raised their rates for about 5 years. We can't imagine ourselves running a business where we don't look at the pricing structure of our business on an annual basis, and where we adjust our prices as we go through time. We couldn't go 5 years without adjusting the prices of our commodity, given the changing prices of what was going on. And this was a different time period, obviously, and different inflation levels and so forth. But that always stuck with me, that basically, and the final comment I would make is that a lot of times when I go to a utility and we need to raise rates by 20% or whatever, I always hear from the board members saying, geez, I wish we had just adjusted our rates by a couple of percent every year. We wouldn't be where we are today. And so I try to impart to all of my clients and the utilities that I work with that there's ways that you can do this that minimize impacts to customers. Ultimately, we all are on the same page as we want to minimize our rates to our customers, but we want to minimize them in a way that's responsible to the utility and to our customers and to the infrastructure that we need to serve our customers. So that's sort of my lecture for the day about, trying to put all this into perspective, because it is a challenging decision for you, but you need to balance all these things out. So discussion has been great today. It's all the things that I've heard for the last 40 years. It's all the concerns, same thing.
So, basically, I think I want to say we did not kick the can down the road from the rate increase.
I saw you do it.
From the rate increase. Because if you, and I'll say this again, if you look at it and look at the rate increase, it was 40% in 2 years. And divided by the 4 years we've been here, that's 10% a year. So we didn't kick it, but now we have to do something else for O&M. That's,
Well,
And that's 1% in 40 years.
Well, and Director Underhill, just further on that, we didn't play games with it by trying to repurpose that last increment of increase to O&M. We said that if we were going to, at any point in the future, be considering any increases to O&M rates, we would go through a transparent, public, exhaustive process to do that. So that's what we're in today.
that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what we're doing.
Okay, anything further on this?
Thank you, Tom.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate all the efforts.
Thanks, Jeff.
Moving on to old business, this is the report, General Manager's report. Mr. Egerton?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, members of the board. Just to let you know, we got some really good news from Cal OES that we have been notified that we have been approved for emergency funding. This is with regard to the storm events of the late January, that we have additional issues that we had to deal with increased cost in response to that, with some of the damage to infrastructure and additional operating cost. That's been approved, so got to really credit Teresa, Jeff, and Charles, and others for their work to compile all the information so that we can submit those and to gain that approval. So that's great, and we'll move forward with that. Also, I just want to mention that we're moving forward on the AB 142 report that's being performed right now by E-Corp Consulting for us. As you recall, that was one of the studies, Moat River studies, specific studies that we were awarded by the board. That's to provide the information about our future demands and our needs in the McCollum River watershed, those areas that potentially would be affected by wild and scenic designation, and so that can be incorporated into the state's analysis, the resource agency's analysis about its suitability for designation. So that's happening, and we have a date set for a town hall public meeting on August 28th in McCollum Hill. Excuse me, at the town hall from 6 to 8 p.m. That is we don't expect that would be a noticed public meeting of the board, because I don't anticipate we'll have a quorum of the board there. If there is a desire for more than, for 3 or more board members to be in attendance, we just need to identify that and make sure we have it agendized appropriately. But the point of that is for us to join with CCWD, who's a partner on this study, and to get out and do some public outreach to really help gain the best information for our report. and that will move forward with a request for the study to be approved by the board at a joint meeting with the CPUD board that we expect will be in September. And as part of this, we're already providing information to the state to help them with their report. They've asked for documentation to help them with it, so information that we already have in our possession. Peter has been working with them, and to further aid them in that, we're also, Jeff Meyer at eCorp is helping us develop a technical memo that we're going to be providing to them in the very near future that's going to make sure they have what they need in a timely manner so that when they complete their work, our needs and projections are included. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Board reports, information, future agenda items. Director Strange.
One of the things that just came across my desk on July 24th, the State Department of Fish and Wildlife has been, they're basically starting a status review of the foothill yellow-legged frog, which is one species that we do have here in abundance in and around some of our water features. Most recently, the project I was involved with the bridge replacement out by Railroad Flat, I encountered 2 of the yellow-legged frogs out there. So what this is, it's a status review. They were petitioned to review the status and other information on the population. But the bottom line is that this is kind of the first in a process that leads to, whether it will or not, we'll see, but leads to some sort of increased ESA listing and restrictions for any construction or operations around known foothill yellow-legged habitat. So that's coming up. That is a frog that, in my opinion, is a lot more abundant in this county than we realize, and it's just we haven't been looking for them, is why we hadn't found them. But projects like this bridge, where you actually have to go out and look for critters like that, they pop up. So anyway, FYI, we'll see if there's any sort of impact. I'm sure there will be, especially if it moves forward with a more restrictive listing, that is going to impact our operations, or at least construction projects in the future. Other than that, my trip to Ireland was great. I and what appeared to be millions of other people enjoyed Ireland. A whole lot of people there, but it's just nice to get away and relax and spend time with family.
Thank you. Director Thomas.
Director Strange, it always baffles me in these environmental issues that when you find a frog in a place where you didn't expect to find one, that precipitates a greater amount of control against moving rocks and stuff. I mean, it seems it's counterintuitive. I mean, if you find them where you don't expect to find them, that would indicate to me that there's a greater population, like you suggested. Where is the logic in this in the world anymore? But, okay, I'm looking at my calendar and I see that there's a District 3 Aqua Conference coming up in Tahoe on the 10th. Is anybody going to attend that?
Let's see, Director Thomas, you're referring to Aqua Region 3 meeting? I think you may have an older date on that. That may have been the original date that was selected. I think now the date that we're looking at for that, which hasn't been confirmed, is middle of September.
Oh, okay.
And it will be at in Auburn at the Ridge. It'll be one-day presentation.
I wasn't following that change. Talking about revenues, I have listed, my wife and I have listed our home for sale, and so we moved out of that home and we've gone over to a place that we're renting from a friend. So I'm actually paying 2 revenues now. So
We're proud of you. We're proud of you.
I'm trying my best to balance your budget.
And continue that, or it'll be on the tax roll.
How do you know it's not?
We're not positive of that, but we'll look into it.
We'll look into it, okay. And I think I'm going to get in trouble if I talk about something else, but I need to talk to you later. But the other very significant thing is that I want to announce to all of you and to the folks at home that I have filed my FPPC 501 intent to run for re-election. So there you go.
Congratulations.
So I hope, I just want you to know that I really have enjoyed the last almost 7 months of participating on the actions of this board, and I look forward to finishing up next year and going for 4 more. Hope that I've brought some levity to the to the group, if nothing else, but I've enjoyed it a lot. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Director Underhill.
Okay, tonight we have the NCPA barbecue, annual barbecue at Murphy's Park. And we started off last Saturday with the annual membership meeting at Forest Meadows, and Joel, thanks very much, was there to take part, and we wanted to, I covered the Reach One and Reach One project because it's going to be right there by Forest Meadows. Joel had several items that he was going to talk about, and you talked about the drought being over and a little bit about the tree mortality. And so we were very well received. People liked talking to us. These are a lot of the people who don't live in the county. They're second homeowners, and this is their one opportunity to talk about their water bill. And so I explained to a woman about the fact that, you know, our costs are not going down, and we had a good session about it today. So she was satisfied that, you know, we're watching it and we will handle it the best we can. So that was last Saturday, and then as I say, tonight we have NCPA. I do sit on the Commission on Aging. Remember, those are the people who make up about 40% of the population in Calaveras County. We're looking for the Senior of the Year, and I can take nominations, Volunteer Senior of the Year.
Which percentage of the county is not aging?
Oh.
Yeah, that's
Oh, you're so cute. Okay, that's all I have.
And I have nothing to report. Our next board meetings are Wednesday, August 9th, and Wednesday, August 23rd. We got item number 9 is closed session conference with real property negotiators, Government Code 54956.8. And with this we'll move into closed session.
Any public comment?
Any public comment on our closed session item? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into closed session. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll be back.